Welcome to the podcast series The New Student Pharmacist, where we discuss chemistry and pharmacy, as well as leaders in pharmacy careers, community, and chemistry and pharmacy research. We encourage you to support the work we are doing and follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts by subscribing for free. Note, the views on the podcast represent those of my guest and I.
Purpose of these episodes not at all for advice or medical suggestions. These are aimed to provide support to peer pharmacists in training in educational and intellectually stimulating ways. Again, these are not at all for medical advice or medical suggestions. Please see your local board and state-certified health professional. The views of this podcast represent those of my guests and I.
You are very important, especially to us here at the New Chemist podcasting group. You listening in is significant.
Vous êtes très important, surtout pour nous ici au New Chemist Podcasting Group. Votre écoute est significative.
Usted es muy importante, especialmente para nosotros aquí en The New Chemist Podcasting Group. Usted escuchando, es significativo.
Você é muito importante. Especialmente para nós do The New Chemist Podcasting Group. Você ouvindo, é significativo.
Είστε πολύ σημαντικοί, ειδικά για εμάς εδώ στο The New Chemist Podcasting Group. Το να ακούς είναι σημαντικό.
Sie sind sehr wichtig, besonders für uns hier bei The New Chemist Podcasting Group. Es ist wichtig, dass du zuhörst.
Je bent erg belangrijk, vooral voor ons hier bij The New Chemist Podcasting Group. Dat je meeluistert, is veelbetekenend.
You are very important, especially to us here at the New Chemist Podcasting Group. You listening in is significant.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, for joining me today. It's so good to have you on as a guest. Me and Gabriel go way back, as is the case with most of my podcast guests. We go way back to Georgia Tech, some good old days. Just before we get started, welcome to the New Chemist. We're glad you're listening. Feel free to download this podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. We discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as careers, community research, and COVID-19. We're happy you're tuning in. My guest today is Gabriel, and I'm excited to have him on. Just a brief intro about Gabriel. Gabriel he has earned the stripes. He has worked at Accenture, climbing up the ranks to become a senior consulting analyst. Now, he works on Amplitude. He's also served as a co-founder and as a lead enterprise engagement manager. So he's definitely earned the stripes. We met at Georgia Tech, where he completed a Bachelor of Science in computer science, and he's also the founder of Grind, Don't No Sleep. So yeah, he's definitely an accomplished young man. It's definitely glad to have him on as a guest. So Gabriel, just before, as we get started, what have been your long-standing interest in the field of science?
Wow, science. It's interesting. I think when I started life out as a good old young kid, science probably went to video games. It's probably my first interest. Okay. Video games being what I used to play a bunch, and that's just what I like to do. You know, playing the Game Boy, Pokemon Yellow, Red, Silver, all the way up that. All the NBA 2Ks, just that whole world got me interested in seeing what technology was capable of doing. And so didn't really know what I wanted to do being a young kid. I just knew I was good at math and science, and eventually that turned into a career in the tech world. So I studied computer science at Georgia Tech, graduated with that degree, but then led me to tech consulting. So being able to kind of balance out, the math and sciences of the world into business logic, I think that's kind of where my head's been going the past few years. So yeah,
that's really good. That's really good. So it's interesting you bring up. It seems like this is a consistent trend. I interviewed a faculty member at Georgia Tech and several other people, and a lot of people talk about how video games led them to become interested in computer science.
Yeah.
Would you say that was something that was fostered by yourself, or by your parents, or by your environment? How did that come about?
Honestly, I feel like depending on the demographic of the audience, for me, my family background, there wasn't a lot of scientists. There wasn't people in the science field. So we were very humble beginnings, people just kind of blue collar workers doing what they need to do, pay the bills. And we weren't really, as a family, in the careers of the science space. So for me, or any kid, that's probably the easiest way to get exposed to science if you don't have it in your family is video games. And for me, that was my outlet. That's what I did, rather than, it was either that or play outside. And so if I wasn't playing sports, I was playing video games. And so I think that was like the closest outlet to figure out what science could do, and specifically computer engineering, computer science, which was my first major coming into college. So that would be my thought.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So my question was, did you start off as computer science, or did you switch to computer science?
Yeah, so I started off as computer engineering. Reason being, I thought my dad showed me a lot about computers. And so because I like computers engineering, that sounds like that's what you're supposed to do if you like math and science. And then I started that.
Okay.
Got into a couple of classes, realized I didn't really care for circuits and hardware and stuff like that. And quickly I was like, how do I get back to that programming thing that I learned? And my first experience with coding was with MATLAB at Georgia Tech, as many people from Georgia Tech have.
CS 1310, I think.
Yep. 1517.
Something like that. Yeah, we remember the numbers.
Yeah. So we learned MATLAB, which was, not necessarily what some engineers would call coding, but it was my introduction to it. And that's when I got excited about it. I had a lot of fun with it, the way the computers work, and realizing the power behind not just video games, but, algorithms, your laptops, anything really, your cell phone, TVs, and the list goes on.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. My question to you is, and as we unpack your career and all the success you've had thus far, my question to you is, how did you overcome, or how did you get through to becoming competent and proficient in programming? Because a lot of people stop at it because they'll be like, oh, this is hard. I'm debugging all the time. It's very frustrating. How did you overcome that barrier?
Yeah, so it's funny because I think my career, and I want to be clear for anyone listening, today I'm not a software engineer. Today I'm not coding. But while I was at school, I definitely had an interest for it. I definitely had an interest for solving problems. And I think that's what led me to go through all the computer science courses and to start coding things like computer graphics, and to code things like audio software, or to create Python scripts for robots to dance around and whatnot. I enjoyed that thought process that it took to make something do an action in that way. And so I think there's generally an interest that you have to have in wanting to solve problems, but just also the way of how we do it as programmers is sitting at your computer and typing it out. Like if you have that joy, I think that's what really kind of pushed me over the edge of wanting to complete that degree. Now, the reason for me to shift away from sitting at my desk and doing that joy that I had was that itself, sitting at a desk. I'd rather be talking with people, collaborating, whiteboarding. And so having a mix of that in like the consulting world is what I was looking for, which I think I found in consulting, and then putting me into a space of software as a consultant, I guess.
So was it hard to transition to Accenture from like the hard sciences to like consulting? Was it hard to transition, or was it a very facile transition?
So I'd say a little bit of both. And the reason why I say a little bit of both is I set myself up in school to make sure that I was finding the proper internships. And as someone coming in with an engineering background, it's a very unique background when you're coming into the consulting world. Generally, a consultant would be a business major or someone who's been in the space of building out PowerPoint decks or understanding business or finance or marketing or any of these like business majors. At Georgia Tech, as we all know from Georgia Tech people, we're all engineers. We're all math and science. Everything we do is on the computer. So we stood out to the consulting companies that were hiring for us. But we also had the barrier of entry of excelling, I would say, at like the typical consulting things, which would be PowerPoint decks, building out spreadsheets, all the equations that it went into actually building out pivot tables and all that. Stuff like that was completely just unknown to me when I got into the space. And so that was the barrier of entry once I realized, oh, okay, as a consultant, this is something you should be good at. Now, I think over time, as I got into my career, I developed that skill. I was not good at it at first, but what differentiated me was the way I did think. And so trying to make sure I leaned in on that while also not stumbling on my weaknesses at the time was kind of what I had to make sure I balanced out at the beginning of my career.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I could think I'm gonna have to re-listen to this, because you said not stumbling on your weaknesses, but leaning forward to what you are aspiring for. That's good. So how do you maintain view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think if we all take a step back, which I think we all did during this time in the pandemic, you recognize, what do you find value in, what do you not? For me, in the beginning of my career, like I mentioned, I did not find joy in creating PowerPoint decks. I did not find joy in project management, and I did not find joy in the spreadsheets. But what I did find joy in is solving the problems and then telling a story. The telling a story piece that I enjoyed, I did not think of as something that I was interested in or even like anywhere near good at when I was doing a lot of math and science related things at Georgia Tech. That came out of me in the consulting world. And then once I realized that I enjoyed that piece, but I was not good at a couple of the pieces that helps tell the stories, that's kind of what motivated me to stay in the lane of figuring out, okay, how do I become a better consultant? It's about better storytelling, which doesn't always lead to a better PowerPoint. It doesn't lead to building out more spreadsheets, but those are just tools in which you can use to leverage the story that you're trying to tell. In that, with data analysis, which is kind of a lot of what my job is today, you're able to tell a story as well. Now, how you gather that information is one way, but how you tell it is another. So I guess losing myself in the question you originally asked, I think my mindset going into my job was really just to understand, how do I become better at the things that I enjoy? And then leverage the things that I don't enjoy, but are kind of like necessities in this lifestyle. So I say that because fast forward to today, my job requires me to make decks. My job requires me to make spreadsheets. And even in my businesses today, I'm using a lot of spreadsheets to get the data that I want, to do the analysis that I want, to help better tell a story. Even in the finance world, you'll find a lot of finance people using spreadsheets to make sure that they make the numbers work for their business, which is another skill that I've had to pick up just as a general entrepreneur and building something out. Finance is like the language to business, and that's usually going to require some spreadsheets. So funny enough, with all those learnings of how to build up my weaknesses, that also led me to now do a lot of that in my day job, and I'm pretty decent at it, at least enough to have me successfully doing my job today. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse, the path that I went through, but I think the learning there is take every opportunity that you have or every season that you're in and run with it, like really lean into it and see what you're going to learn from it, because you might not need it. in the next 5 to 10 years, but something might come up, and that one little piece nugget that you took away from that season might be helpful down the line.
Yeah.
So
that's seeing purpose in what you're going through. That's good. So my question to you is, how are you doing all of this? Like, are you a serial entrepreneur? Would you consider yourself to be a serial entrepreneur? How are you managing all of this, Gabriel? Tell us the secret. What's the secret? Tell us the secret.
I'm not sure if I have a secret, unfortunately, but I think we're all learning how to do it on our own way. Just like you, David, we all, especially at Georgia Tech, have to find a way to make do with the time that we do have. So naturally, as a person, I like to find myself busy. I like to find myself moving a lot. I, have been flying around a lot and travel these past few weeks, even along with balancing my day job and balancing a business on the side of my day job. So just to give color on what I'm doing. Today, I work at a company called Amplitude. We are a product analytics company. I am an engagement manager on the professional services team. So we help all of our customers that buy our software get onboarded onto that platform. So that is my main day-to-day job, is helping product managers get onboarded to our product analytics software. On my night job, let's call it the 5 to, midnight time job, I lead a social group called Over the Top with a couple of friends actually from Georgia Tech. But with that social group, we're basically amplifying gratitude through celebration. So we plan events and curate events and experiences for other like-minded individuals, entrepreneurs, young professionals that are trying to network, but also experience cool things at the same time. And so I, on top of those two things, did like 5, 6, 7 other different things in my life. And I had to realize at some point that I needed to narrow my focus on the things that I really cared about the most, at least at that point. So today, what that is my job, and it's Over the Top. Those are the 2 things that I definitely put a lot of my energy in. And then aside from that, I always like to make sure that I'm building up things like your spiritual health, your physical health, your mental health, which is another conversation. But I think as long as you're making sure you're tapping into those spaces, that's going to help you feel elevated in the other areas that you're focusing on, which in my case right now is my job and my social group.
Yeah, that's good. So how have you been adaptive and creative in the field of business and science? So you started these companies. What unique flair have your companies added to the business world? Or what unique flair have you added to your job itself, outside of your personhood? What unique flair have you added?
The main thing that I think really took off for just myself personally, or what allowed me to take off in my career and in my business ventures and just life in general, is owning up into being my full self. I think being at a consulting firm, you kind of adapt to the environment around you, and you think you need to be this corporate self of you that they want you to be. Coming as a person of color, right? My family's Puerto Rican Dominican, I'm Afro-Latino. It's easy for you to feel misplaced in environments like this in corporate America, not understanding how you should act. And I think Accenture did a good job of making sure that they wanted us to be our full selves. Now, granted, a company that big, it's hard to see that trickle down effect of actually feeling comfortable being your true self. But there was a moment in time where I recognized that there was value in me being me, which was sometimes a very expressive personality, sometimes being very lighthearted and wanting to have just joy in what we did. Without having to give you the cool big words. Maybe I can make a Drake reference in a customer call. Maybe I can, talk about my weekend candidly and be okay with that. Obviously, there's pros and cons to that, and there's probably some things you probably shouldn't mention to your coworkers or anything like, oh yeah, I was looking for another job. Like that'd be probably a bad thing to talk about if that was the case. Mm-hmm. But I think being true to myself and my environment at work is what excelled me to now feel comfortable in my own skin. But now if people also can gravitate towards you and be comfortable with talking to you, and now you and that person can build relationships. And at the end of the day, everything in this world is about relationships. Mm-hmm. And if people can't connect with you as a human being, that's going to just take away opportunities for you and for that person. So that's probably the number one thing that's helped me build out my career as in tech. But also built out my brand in the social group at Over the Top. Because at the end of the day, just to be clear, David, my day-to-day job in corporate America is one thing, and my social life with the social group, traveling, hitting the world, going out to bars and nightclubs every now and then, or actually just getting on a boat and having a good time in Mexico, we all do these social things for the most part. We all have social lives. And so I am candid in my day-to-day and talk about what I do. I'll share photos. Again, to everybody's discretion, but I like to own up to what I'm doing. And I think people connect to that better as a human being than not doing that. So again, I just want to caveat one more time with your discretion, right? That doesn't mean tell everybody your entire life. With your discretion, just be your full self in these environments. That's what's helping me out. Yeah,
that's good. That's very good. So how did you seek or find the right environment for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually? So let's take it a step. Let's go a little bit back a bit. So you start off in high school and ended up at Georgia Tech. How did you know that Georgia Tech was the right place for you? Step one, how did you know that was the right place for you?
So I did not have a lot of counseling on schools and being able to go to the right one. I've actually only applied to 2 schools in high school.
Okay.
The first one was the University of Miami because my family was in Miami, and that's the only reason why I applied. And the second one was Georgia Tech because I was going to high school in Georgia, and my counselor said I should apply to an in-state school that was a good school and that I can get, good scholarships. So that's the only reason why I applied to Georgia Tech. Those are the only 2 schools I applied to. So I got into both. And luckily enough, I actually got a full scholarship at Georgia Tech, which allowed me to attend it and get the education that I got and then open up the opportunities that I had. So if it wasn't for that counselor in high school, I would have not been at Georgia Tech and I would not be doing what I'm doing today in the tech world. I'd probably be back in Miami doing whatever I would have been doing at the time. God knows that story, but what I do know now is I thank that counselor every day. I think about that story in my head because if that conversation hadn't happened, I would have probably not be here today.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, dude, that's very good. So I remember when you were at Georgia Tech, you were part of OMED. So what led you to jump into that? Was that because of your personality? What led you to do those activities while at Georgia Tech?
Yeah, so OMED, I believe some folks have talked about it in the podcast already, but that's basically where all the minority students could go and get any educational support for the Georgia Tech experience. The percentage of minority students at Georgia Tech is very small, and so being able to find that home and community where you can just feel like you have people that can relate to you culturally, but just as a lifestyle was great, and to have that support as well. So I think that's naturally where I gravitated towards OMED. I was originally introduced to OMED by the Challenge program, which was a program that's put on by OMED for minority students the summer before entering their freshman year. And you get prepared in a 4-week program on how to get a 4.0 or just be surviving in the school as a freshman student. So that basically led to my lifelong friends that I have even to this day. Kyle Woom, who's been on the podcast and is also a co-founder of Over the Top with me, and has also been my roommate out here in the Bay Area, was also someone I met through that program. Okay. So it's overall, that program not only has given me friends of a lifetime, but it's also given me skills to this day that continue to help me push forward.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and I would say, that's really good. Yeah, Georgia Tech, I think, was almost like a concentrated pool of talent, a concentrated network that has led to a lot of things for me personally as well. Yep. So, how were you able to start a company? Grind, Don't, No Sleep. Why did you name it that, and why did you start that?
Yeah, so the story that I have with Grind, Don't, No Sleep. First, a lot of you might ask, that grammatically is incorrect. That is correct, that it's grammatically incorrect. It was my freshman year of Georgia Tech, and I interned at Procter & Gamble in the summer. I had an experience for the first time working at a company that just wasn't a McDonald's, because that was my only job prior to that. Again, as I mentioned, my family isn't in corporate America like that. It's so humble beginnings all around. And so being in like a space like Procter & Gamble with the cubicles and a lifeless salary was different. I recognized in this opportunity that there were a lot of people that had family that had this opportunity to tell them, hey, this is what a Procter & Gamble would look like. This is what it would look like to work at a corporate America job and get a nice salary or intern for a summer. Internships, things like that, salary, those were things that I was not used to hearing just growing up. And so I was kind of frustrated. I was kind of down, and I had a really rough summer just from like a mindset perspective, and recognizing that this whole time in my life, I've never been introduced to what was possible here up until this point. Like if it wasn't for that counselor that told me to go to Georgia Tech, if it wasn't for OMED and the Challenge program to tell me I need to be in internships, I wouldn't have been at this internship and I wouldn't have this experience. So that led to the idea that there needs to be someone teaching about these opportunities to give people opportunity to be successful. And that's when the idea of Grind on No Sleep came up, with a conversation that would have made my friends Andrew Wright, who was also a friend from OMED that I met through Challenge and is still a friend to this day. Basically, we just had a conversation, and he's like, how do we maintain this lifestyle to make sure we can take this back to our families so they know it's possible? You just got to grind and not sleep, grind on no sleep. And so from there, that moment, that motto was created, grind on no sleep, which means just grinding towards your passion and not sleeping on the opportunities to go after it. And so it was focused on speaking to just basically students in socioeconomic conditions that don't have the opportunities for these opportunities or understand it. And so we spoke to a lot of young high school, college students or upcoming college students and mentored them with different workshops and what that might look like. So that was the inspiration behind the t-shirts. We launched a brand we launched a t-shirt, campaign with the slogan on it. A lot of students got behind it, bought into the brand. The housing department at Georgia Tech also bought into it. We gave it to some of our residents. And it was just basically since then a mindset that we kept going with for college and to this day.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think about the analogy in chemistry. Sometimes for things to precipitate, you just need one drop of a particular chemical, one drop for co-precipitation. And I think the same thing is true when it comes to successful living and to also being successful in school. Many times, even in grad school and even before grad school, many times it's a matter of the right opportunity, doing research at a particular university to get the letter of rec from someone at the university to transition into the university. So it's those key moments and key nuggets of advice that really help and make a difference, a world of a difference, I would say.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice to those wanting to pursue the field you're currently working in?
So the field that I'm currently working in is the professional services space in SaaS. SaaS stands for Software as a Service, which is pretty much any software that has a subscription basis. And so today, my company, Amplitude, is a software as a service company. If you think of any company that has a software that has some sort of subscription attached to it, it's pretty much every and all companies that you have on your computer, essentially. So being in that space, consulting is the first route to get into that. My route there was going through Accenture, and I actually found the first company that I applied to after Accenture, which was Optimizely, because they were actually a client of mine through Accenture. So that's how I was exposed to that. So just being in consulting space, just in general, if you're not curious, or if you're just curious on how to get involved in the different spaces and dabble a little bit, consulting is the best way to just jump into a career, learn how to see how businesses run, but also get exposure to a bunch of different companies since you're going to be staffed on a bunch of different projects. And you'll quickly find out what you like and what you don't like. And so that's how I found out that this space, professional services, existed in the SaaS space, and found my way there.
What has been the most beneficial advice you have received to date? Or some of it. And that's a big one. That's a big question.
Yeah, that's a huge question. I mean, I think I noted it earlier today, which is just be yourself. I mean, lean in on that 100%. I think, in today's world, and you probably hear this a lot nowadays, but we're very distracted with what things should look like, with how things should sound, what things should feel. And I think oftentimes with all of that noise, you just limit yourself and you think oh, if I'm not that, then I don't have it. But, David, seeing you as someone from Georgia Tech starting this podcast as an example, you've ran with it and you've had 100 episodes or so. I don't know how many, but it was a lot when I looked at it.
Yeah, less than 100, bro. Less than 100. Thanks for piping me up. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's coming through. But I mean, the fact that you're running with it, no matter what, I've dabbled in the thought of maybe I should start a podcast, but people do it and they feel it, and I think if you have that thought, you run with it, feel it, and just enjoy it. And it might not work out for some people who maybe don't have the voice for it or whatever the case may be, but just being able to say I look back and I tried that, just I felt it in my heart. I've seen so many people just not pull through because of just that fear and just being yourself. So it's very cliche, it's very cheesy, but I think it does matter. I think it's definitely changed my career being myself, and it's changed the relationships that I have today. Just I stand out.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it's cheesy, to be honest with you. I think everyone has unique personhood, and that's also coming from my faith perspective as well. I think everyone has unique personhood, and everybody can complement, in my personal opinion, Everyone can complement to their workspace, their lives. And there's always purpose in situations and purpose in people. So I completely agree with that. It pays to be yourself. And it takes time. You gotta be honest. It takes time to become comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah.
Where like as you mentioned, the distractions don't bother you to the point where because you are comfortable in your skin. You know who you are and you know what you're about. So yeah, dude, this is really good. I'm going to have to re-listen to this because this is good. But thank you so much, Gabriel, for joining me today. It's so good to have you on.
Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is The New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guests and I.
Hi, Keshav. It's so good to have you on. Thanks again for joining me. So, let's get started. What have been your long-standing interests in the field of science?
Yeah, so I've been interested in science for such a long time, since childhood, really. And there's a lot of different things that brought me to it. And I think the first and most important one was just the constant kind of learning and evolving that science occurs through. And if you're someone that practices science or is part of the scientific field, you go through the same kind of development and evolution as well. You are constantly learning things. Every field is constantly evolving. So you're never stagnant. You're always changing as times change, as things change, everything changes. So you change with it. And I think the second thing that really drew me to science was that you're able to make a real tangible impact on people's lives. With your understanding of science and your understanding of how things work, you can manipulate things and change some things so that you can, potentially fix some problems or even be proactive about things to really make a significant impact upon people in the world that we live in. I think those two factors were huge reasons why I was drawn to science and can constantly pursue the scientific field.
Yeah, I completely agree with you because, I think I've come to understand that the more you learn, the more you realize there's so much more to learn.
Absolutely.
As I think even now, especially during this pandemic time, we can see the significance of science and the use of science in terms of developing and eventually testing the vaccination for COVID-19, and also in our daily lives in which we go to doctors and sit down on the science teachers and on the science professors and perform research, in my case, as well as you as well. So, how do you maintain view of the bigger picture in your life and in your career in general? Given all of the difficulties which I'm sure you faced, all of the challenges and which a lot of people are facing due to this pandemic, how do you maintain view of the bigger picture?
Yeah, so just like you said, it is very, very, very difficult. And at times it's very easy to get kind of bogged down by the minutia, and the everyday little challenges that we face. And, especially with the pandemic, just things are magnified, times 10 or even more. But I'll kind of give you an example. So recently, with medical education, what we have are like graded clinical examples. Basically, we're told to okay, go take a history and physical on a patient. This patient will then grade you based on, how well you performed the physical and things like that. So I just recently got my grade back for one of my encounters, and I was looking through the checklist, and I was, kind of getting frustrated about where I lost some points. I was it's such little things that you lose points on. But then at the end of the comment section, the patient wrote, I felt very well respected, I felt heard, and I felt that if you were my doctor, I would be well taken care of. And honestly, once I read that one statement, all of my anger, all of my frustration went out the window. I was like, okay, you know what? I can get better. Maybe the patient's criticisms was valid, and the specific techniques, we can always get better at that. But at the end of the day, why I'm doing what I'm doing is for the patient, and it's to make this patient feel like they have a partner in healthcare. So taking little things like that, realizing what's the bigger goal of it all, what are you really trying to achieve, and kind of validating that made me feel like, okay, this is all worth it. Like the challenges that I'm facing, academically right now, um, personally, just
Mm-hmm.
it's all for something. It's all meant for something. So just hearing that validation made me realize, okay, it's all going to be worth it.
Yeah, I can say a lot of things on that. It's important to be focused on specific things in terms of having a growth mindset, which is very important, as
Mhm.
well as, validation is important. And it plays a large role in a lot of people's growth in academia, as well as even in the lab. Having a professor say you did a good job is significant. Having a professor say you're on the right path,
Mhm. Mhm.
it does compliment. So I've read your bio, and we knew each other beforehand before you went to medical school. So my question to you is, how have you been adaptive and creative in the field of science?
Yeah, so I mean, from where I'm at right now, I'm definitely in the, I'm still a student, I'm still in the learning phase.
Yeah.
Before I don't think I can make any like real significant contribution yet. But the ways that I've been creative and adaptable is mainly in that learning is how I choose to understand and kind of process information. Because with science and with, just medicine, the field that I'm in, there's so much. There's just so much information. I believe one of your other guests, Tommy, he said it's like drinking water from a fire hose, and that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. There's just so much. So, I'm not the type of person that can sit down and read a textbook for like 8 to 10 hours a day. So I've had to be, pretty creative with just the ways that I, understand some things or even memorize some things. There's lots of resources outside that kind of put, let's say, a specific medical condition, they'll put it in like a picture so that you're making associations with words and specific clinical symptoms and treatments, and they'll all pull it together. And like that's how I've chosen to learn different diseases, so that when a question comes up or when a patient presents with a specific set of symptoms, I'm now making the association. So just from handling all that information, how I choose to apply it, I think has been the real way that I've been the most creative or adaptable, at least right now. Hopefully, I make more significant impacts in the future so that, I can say that, I did something new or I did something new to help someone. But as of right now, that's where I'm at.
Okay, that's good. And also, actually, before I get to that, so you said that you've been adaptive and creative in your learning style, your approach to
Mhm.
the content.
Mhm.
So in what ways? Give us some examples of some resources that you use for people who are listening.
Yeah, so I mean, there's tons of things out there, specifically for medical students. I'm sure that they've all heard of this, or if you're going into medical school, you'll definitely hear about these. But Sketchy is a big one.
Okay.
That's the picture thing that I was talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
A
Okay.
good tool for kind of, because inevitably with medicine, you're just gonna have to end up memorizing some things. Is Anki? It's basically a like kind of like a I want to say that it's basically a flashcard device, but it has its own algorithm for spatial repetition and
Yeah.
memory and things like that. So it's a
Yeah.
good tool. Um, Personally, what I've done is I've kind of brought it back to some of our engineering roots with the ways that we've kind of like understood things back in some of our intro BME classes, where we've had to just, they just kind of threw us a problem. We had to just go understand it and break it down on our own terms. So a lot of the body, if it comes to like blood flow or circulation, I'm breaking it down into like pressures and flows and just understanding like resistances, like understanding it through that means. So if you're breaking it down that way, it kind of made more sense to me just because it was going back to things that I've been dealing with for a couple of years now. So yeah, those are the couple of ways that I've been trying to learn everything.
That's good, dude. That's good. For me, I remember, you may not remember this, but I remember a while back, this is when we were still at Georgia Tech. I think it was me, you, and a few other people. And I started building off one of my wraps for the amino acids.
Yes, I do remember. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, that's kind of how I learn things. I put it to a rhythm, I make a rhyme, Also, I use associations, draw pictures and stuff like that. But for me, my main modality is through rhymes and raps and lyrics.
And we all have our own unique ways to learn things. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we have to make sure we're enjoying it. But I'll just throw this out there to you. I've interviewed several other people, and one of the ways, and also graduate students and medical students, and one of the ways they have also been able to make an impact is also through mentorship. So that may be something you may want to consider. But I'm sure that a lot of people are trying to get into medical school, and you achieve that. So I think that's commendable. So my question to you on that note is, to this point in your studies, how have you been able to be successful? You were able to graduate, you were able to get into medical school, and so far you've been progressing. How have you been able to maintain the success that you need to progress from stages, from graduation to medical school?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the question itself is very focused on me, but when I think about why I'm where I am, is mainly because of the people around me. I have to give a ton of people a lot of credit for helping me out through the entire process, starting with my family, who's just been there for me through everything. My mother is a physician, so she's been a wonderful role model and a leader, basically guiding me, throughout the medical field. And whenever I have any challenges, she's just like, "Yep, I faced the exact same thing. Don't worry, kid, you're on the right path." But then also my friends, who are basically my second family. They've been there for me through everything, personally, academically, any problems that I've faced. They've been there for me. They're the reason that, like, I feel like I've grown as a person throughout the years. They've challenged me, they've supported me, they've taught me things, I've taught them things. So both just the people around me has been a major reason why I'm at where I'm at. And I don't think there's anything really special about me. I think I'm just persistent. I'm stubborn. If I fail one time, I'm gonna get right back up and keep trying until someone else, until I just can't keep going anymore. So I think that's really the only thing. I'm not like the smartest person. I'm not the most talented, but I'm persistent. I think maybe that's probably the only thing that's kept me going, really.
That's good. Yeah, for me too. It's the same. I'm not any genius or anything of that sort, but one of the things I do say, or one of the things I do is I work hard. And I believe in being persistent. It's interesting that you use the word stubborn, because one of the professors from MIT that I interviewed said the exact same thing about himself. He said, I'm just stubborn. Yeah, I stick with it and I go along, as he was discussing his work in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic and his contributions there. Also, continuing on, how have you sought or found the right environment for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually? In other words, why did you choose Georgia Tech, and why did you choose New York Medical College to study medicine?
Well, I guess from a general point of view, when it comes to the environment, just like I said before, it's surrounding yourself by the right people. Those people have caused me to grow both personally and academically. And then when it comes to both tech and YMCA, well, I chose tech mainly because it was first of all away from home. I had grown up in the Northeast for 18 years at that point, so I just wanted to kind of leave and go somewhere different. And tech was different. It's in the South, completely different in the Northeast, and there was no one that I really knew at tech. I was kind of just on my own. There was no like if I went to, let's say, a local university, I could always come home if things were difficult, or I just wasn't feeling right. But when you're like 800 miles away, it's a little bit more difficult. So I was kind of out there on my own, which I wanted to be. I just wanted to see if I could make it.
Okay.
And then when it comes to NYMC, I think at that point I'd realized that, okay, I think after 4 years of being on my own, I can do it. And then I chose NYMC mainly because of the opportunities and the proximity to New York City. So, and just the opportunities that it would afford me, tons of hospitals, tons of different populations, like it's a diverse population, kind of the patients that we treat, whether it be in the Bronx or Manhattan or Westchester,
Oh wow.
whole different subsets of population. So we see a whole different um,
Array.
disease profile. Yeah, so it's just the variety. I think that's what really drew me there.
Okay, good. Yeah, dude, diversity is so important. And I think diversity complements the learning in several ways, and not just with diverse populations. So, you said you were in New York City. So, my question to you is, how have you been able to matriculate with the COVID-19 pandemic and clinicals and being in New York? How has that interplay between those three variables? How has that played out?
Yeah, it's been very difficult. So I actually started medical school last year before the pandemic started. So that was kind of like normal and baseline, and just
Uh,
comparing last year to this year. So this year completely virtual, all classes are virtual, very few clinical encounters.
okay.
So basically kind of the way med school works is your third and fourth year are purely clinical. You're
Mm-hmm.
in, some rotation site constantly, but first and second year they kind of try to get your feet wet, but with just the amount of restrictions and the amount of kind of safeguards that you have to go through, it's been very difficult. Thankfully, our school has been really trying to get us still into clinic somehow, some way. So when I do go back to campus, they're gonna start giving us preceptors or mentors that we'll be able to shadow and potentially work with some patients. So it's been very difficult for sure, but I think you know you can't avoid the pandemic one way or another, especially if you're trying to go into medicine. It's a reality of life. So
Yeah.
you kind of have to take the right safeguards and just kind of get in there and do what you can to really make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. You can't avoid every difficulty. You can't avoid. Many times you have to embrace. You have to acknowledge it, embrace it, come up with a strategy to deal with it, and progress through it.
Hmm.
So yeah, dude, I
Yeah.
agree. Even for me, I'm in graduate school right now, and the pandemic has affected us in terms of the formality of the instruction and even with lab interactions. So I completely agree. Um, so given your responsibilities and accomplishments, how do you
One of the
maintain
things
a
that they're really
balanced
trying to
life?
stress in medical school right now is to avoid physician burnout and maintain some sort of work-life balance, because it's so easy to get lost. And I could definitely get better. I'm not going to say I'm an expert at it at all, but I think for right now, what's worked best for me is just physically schedule in breaks. Like I turned into a big scheduler. I like to know what my day is going to be, and I
Mm-hmm.
schedule breaks, just force myself to take a break somehow, some way. I literally will write down, okay, lunch, go make food, or go take a shower now. Like it's to that point. I'm also a big sports guy, so thankfully, like there are some sports on, and they're usually at night. So that's usually when my break is, whenever
Yeah.
one of the games is on or something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a nice way to like kind of schedule my break around something that's already a preset time. But other than that, sometimes you just feel like cooped up in my room all day. That's where I do all of my studying. So I just feel, locked in my room all day. So sometimes I'll just go out and run just to like get the blood pumping and just, see the outdoors for the first time in a couple of days. So just
Yeah. I agree.
physically putting it in my schedule and, forcing myself to do it really really gets me to take it. And then I think the most important thing is when you're taking a break, fully enjoy it. Sometimes what I used to do in undergrad was, okay, I'll watch the game, but I'll also like try to do some studying on the side, some like busy work that I don't really need to pay attention with. And you end up not getting either done. You don't ever watch it fully, and you don't ever get the work done properly. So I think I
Oh,
realized that you need to fully focus. Don't multitask. Don't try to like, do it halfway. Fully enjoy it, and then when you're done, fully get to work.
yeah. I completely do. That's good. That's very good. I might take something and write that down. Because in several ways, um, when we decide to rest, I think we should make sure that we're intentional with resting and not
Hmm.
trying to, oh, out of guilt, I'm going to do some work on the side as
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
or go to the gym, and then you carry a book with you, like a textbook
yeah,
or something of that
yeah.
sort. So yeah, I completely agree. I'm there. I'm there with you in terms of making sure you fully rest. So continuing on, why did you choose biomedical engineering as a field to major in during your undergraduate years? Why did you choose it?
Yeah, so it was actually you asking me for why I chose it, but it was almost a little bit of indecision. Like I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do coming out of high school. Like I knew that I wanted math to be like I wanted a big math component of my future career. I also like biology, chemistry, just all of the sciences. So I knew I wanted to do something in there. And when I heard about biomedical engineering, it was a big kind of like a big mishmash of everything. You know, you'd learn this, you'd learn that, you learn a little bit of everything so that you could eventually go do something with it. You know, you're learning all these skills and you're going to take these skills and you can do whatever you want with it. So that not being forced down a specific pathway or not being like, okay, you can only do this one thing really drew me toward biomedical engineering because it was just, you're going to learn skills. What you do with those skills is up to you. And that's what really drew me towards biomedical engineering, especially at the start.
So the versatility of the skill set, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Versatility of the skill set. And for me, what drew me to biomedical engineering was I was interested in device design. So at the time, those are things that drew me. So why did you choose medicine as a field to do your doctoral studies in?
Yeah.
Why choose medicine? Almost like the med school interview question. Why choose medicine? Why?
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if this is the traditional med school answer, but like I remember for our BME classes towards the end, especially around, I think this was around senior year, for one of the classes, I'll never forget this. So the professor introduced a guest being like, well, this guy has sold his startup for, I don't know, tens or $20 million. So you're getting the best educate, you're getting the best guy here. I just kind of looked at myself and I was like, is this really how I want to be introduced for the rest of my life, as just how much money I made or how much money I made someone else? And I was like, no, I want my self-worth to be valued from what I can do for people, for how much I can help someone. Like, yeah, of course, money is great, but that's not what I want to be known for at the end of the day. That's not, what I want to be remembered for. And that was like the eureka moment of, yeah, I don't think engineering is for me. I was kind of on the fence, and that's what really pushed me towards medicine. Just the idea that your worth is what you can do for someone else. That's what mattered more to me than anything else, and that's why I got into biomedical engineering. Like I imagined a day where like I'd be in my own office, designing devices for patients, working with them, working with their lifestyles. And the more I learned about biomedical engineering, the more it just wasn't like that. And the more medicine was turning out to be like that, where it's, you're working with patients to come up with solutions. It's not just the general, okay, I'm the doctor, listen to me. You're working with the patient to come up with the solution that's best for them. Like I have the information, but you're the expert in your own life. So let's work together to come up with a solution for that. That's what I realized, like, that's what I wanted. And that's what I'm getting from medicine. And that's why I chose medicine, and I'm so happy I stuck with that choice for that reason.
Right, that's very good. I completely agree. It's not this, and I agree in several ways. Our self-worth should be tied to intrinsic core values and not just monetary descriptors. Even though in many ways people say your net worth is tied to those monetary descriptors.
Yeah.
But your self-worth, I think, should be tied to core values. That's just my perspective, and it seems like it's yours as well. So, along the same lines, what advice do you have to those wanting to pursue the field you are currently studying in? So you just said that you're interested in medicine, and your interest is tied to how you want to help people and how you want there to be a dialogue in the clinical environment in which both of you approach the situation, you with your expertise, the patient with their situation, expert in how they're feeling, and you come to some beneficial conclusion. So what advice do you have to those wanting to pursue the field you're currently studying in?
Yeah, so there's a lot of kind of aspects to that. So I guess the first thing that I would say is, yes, it's great that you want to help someone, and I'm sure that's the core of everyone who wants to go into medicine. Yes, we all want to help people, but if that's the only reason you're going into medicine may not be it for you. There has to be some sort of kind of selfish motivator that's driving you towards medicine. And for me, it was the constantly learning, constantly developing. Like I want to be a better person 10 years from now than I am today. I want to be much better. And medicine allows me to do that. So I would say really make sure that medicine is for you, because it's a long grind, you know, from the day you enter medical school till the day you get your first real job is probably close to like 10 years. So to go through 10 years of school and then residency and then fellowship or whatever extra schooling you want to do, you have to make sure that there's something in it for you, that there's some internal gain that you are getting from medicine that no other field can give you. And that's what will really drive you to be the best physician or whatever role of healthcare you want to be. Um, Other than that, you know, be be patient and be persistent. You know, it's a
Mm-hmm.
long grind. Um, like a lot of people, what they do is they go into a career right out of college, and then once they're done with that, they choose to come into medical school. So there's
Mm-hmm.
no real rush, you know, being like I have to go straight into medical school right out of undergrad. Absolutely
Mm-hmm.
not. The average, I think the average age of my incoming class was 27. So if you're graduating around 23, 24, you know, people have worked for a couple of years. A lot of students have children, have families. So, you know, like have a life outside of medical school.
I
If you want to
agree.
have a life before medical school, that's absolutely fine. You know, just be patient. You know, if you have to apply multiple times, if you have to redo some coursework, redo the MCAT, it's all perfectly fine. You know, it's a long journey. No one
Mm.
really cares if you did it right the first time. Just do the best that you can in every aspect.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, that's basically it.
good. That's good. Being patient and persistent, because at the end of the day, we're all on a journey, and also our paths are different. So just because one person went to medical school in 2 years after undergrad, or 1 year, or did the traditional, or just went directly after, doesn't mean you have to do the same. Yeah.
Absolutely. All that matters is the care that you can give to the patient. So whatever gets you to do the best for that, that's all that matters. Doesn't matter what path you took. You said that perfectly.
Yeah. So, Keshav, what has been some of the most beneficial advice you have received?
Huh. So advice that I've received. So I wouldn't say this has been explicitly told to me, but I think what all of my mentors have tried to really emphasize upon me or get me to do it. I think the best way to sum it up is, you know, fall in love with the process of becoming great. You know, really enjoy
Mm-hmm.
the really enjoy the kind of struggle that you're going through now. You know,
Mm-hmm.
for yes, it's for some other bigger picture goal. Like yes, me, you know, studying right now is for to eventually become a doctor. But if I don't enjoy it now, I'm not going to enjoy being that physician. I'm not going to enjoy the work that I'm eventually going to have to do. So really enjoy the struggle, the hard work, all the skills and experiences that you're learning, all the kind of mistakes that you make throughout the process, because that's what you're eventually going to learn from. You learn more from your mistakes than all of your successes. So, really just enjoy that process. Get good at just getting back up after you make a mistake and, you know, keep going. That's the only way that you're going to learn. And I think people showing me that really taught me to be persistent and taught me to just keep going no matter what, because that's that's the only right thing to do. Just keep going.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's important to embrace the struggle and, our process to become doctors, lawyers, accountants, professors, technicians. It's important to be a person of value, not
Mm-hmm.
just uh, someone who can bring value and someone who has core values and who lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think it's also important to watch out for the destination fallacy, in which you think, I must arrive to this place, then I'll be happy, or I must arrive to this next phase, then I'll be happy.
Absolutely.
And yeah, dude. So my last question for you, Keisha, before we conclude, perfect scenario. Given this pandemic, I take it we all have had situations where we could say, I wish something was a little different. If you had to come up with a perfect scenario in the next 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
what would it be within the context of your medical education and night?
When it,
What would it be?
well, that's a great question. And I think my first, I don't know if this would be my answer maybe in a couple of days, but my first gut reaction went to kind of something that I've been thinking about for a while, is that this whole pandemic has kind of taught all of us the importance of health and hygiene, you know,
Yeah.
just taking everything very seriously. You know, it's very easy to catch a cold or, you know, catch the flu. We see
Mm-hmm.
how easy it is to catch COVID just from, you know, going outside, going to a restaurant. You know, you could still be masked up and you would take all the proper precaution. You could still, you know, still catch a virus. So I think the perfect situation for me right now is that we all take our health a lot more seriously. We
Mm-hmm.
understand how fragile it is and
Mm-hmm.
how truly important and precious our health is, and how much we need to take care of it for the long term. I think for me right now, that's the answer that I would say is a perfect scenario.
Oh, that's good. It's important for everyone to realize that their health and your health is very important. So, Keshav, thanks again for joining me today. It is good to have you on. It was good to have you on. Thank you.
Welcome to the New Chemist podcast. We're glad you're listening. Feel free to download this podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Here on the New Chemist, we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. We're happy you're tuning in. My guest today is Dr. Emery Brown. Thanks for joining me today. It is so good to hear from you. Just briefly, I'll inform my audience about you. Dr. Emery Brown is the Edward Hood Professor of Medical Engineering and Computational Neuroscience at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the Warren M. Zappel Professor of Anesthesia at Harvard Medical School, and a practicing anesthesiologist at Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Brown received his BA magna cum laude in applied mathematics from Harvard College, his MA and his PhD in statistics from Harvard University, and his MD magna cum laude from Harvard Medical School. Dr. Brown is an anesthesiologist statistician whose experimental research has made important contributions towards understanding the neuroscience of how anesthetics act in the brain to create the state of general anesthesia. In his statistics research, he has developed signal processing algorithms to solve important data analysis challenges in neuroscience. His research has been featured on National Public Radio, in Scientific American, Technology Review, the New York Times, and in TED Mid 2014. He serves as the director of the Harvard MIT Health Sciences and Technology Program, the associate director of the Institute for Medical Engineering and Science at MIT, an investigator at the Picora Center for Learning and Memory, Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences at MIT. He's a fellow of the Institute of Mathematical Statistics, a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors, a member of the National Academy of Engineering, a member of the National Academy of Sciences, and a member of the National Academy of Medicine. In 2007, he was given the NIH Director's Pioneer Award. He's also a member of the Association of University Anesthesiologists. These are just a few of his accomplishments. A very distinguished scientist. Please welcome Dr. Emery Brown. Chemistry field highlights. Femtochemistry. So surveying the literature and looking at the work of Yoshitaka Tanamura, Koichi Yamashita, and Philip A. Anfinrod, we embark on a new discussion, femtochemistry. In short, a key feature of chemistry is the hemolysis or breaking or the formation of bonds, which some consider to be theoretical constructs in some instances. A key feature of the elementary steps of bond making and breaking are molecular vibrations, which occur approximately at the 10 femtosecond scale. So, with this view in mind, ultra-fast processes are or is a phrase that can definitely describe chemical reactions and has been umbrellaed or covered or falls under the term femtochemistry. Thanks, Dr. Brown, for joining me today. It's so good to have a distinguished scientist such as you on this podcast.
So, Dr. Brown, what have been your long-standing interests in the field of science? Can you just discuss some of those?
Well, I think they varied over time. I think that probably my strongest interest in science began in college when I got interested in statistics. So being a statistician, developing statistical methods and algorithms that people could really use to analyze data became an early interest of mine. And that's something which I pursued, throughout my career. First working on studying outcomes from surgery as an undergraduate, then later studying circadian rhythms during my PhD work.
Okay.
After that, looking at developing algorithms in general for neuroscience data analysis, for looking at neural spike trains, for looking at EEG, LF, local field potentials, and these sorts of things.
Okay.
And then from there, my interest developed into trying to understand anesthesia. So I'd say those are probably the principal focus areas, so statistics, and then statistics applied to neuroscience, and then anesthesiology, the mechanism of general anesthesia.
So I think by any standard of measurement, or most standards of measurement, most people would say you have been a successful academician. You have achieved your PhD from Harvard, your MD from Harvard, MA from Harvard, BA from Harvard. You've won numerous prizes. You're part of many societies: the National Academy of Inventors, National Academy of Science, National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Medicine. So how do you maintain view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general? How are you doing that?
And so when you say the bigger picture, you're referring to?
Academically and also personally. How do you maintain view of the bigger picture in terms of like the overarching goals that you have set, your mission statement, your vision for your life?
Well, I think that one of the things that I've tried to do is try to work on an important question.
Okay.
And what you find out with important questions is you can't solve them in 5 minutes. So that necessarily creates like a long trajectory. So for example, the problem of thinking on how does anesthesia work, that's something which has been a question for now coming near 175 years. And so picking part of that and going after it, it's something which is going to be, it's a challenging question. And if you're able to solve it, it's going to have broad implications, not only for taking care of patients, but also for neuroscience in general and science in general. So that's the sort of things I've tried to work on, like picking important questions. So as another illustration, in thinking about circadian rhythms are everywhere. They control our daily function. So the more we're able to accurately quantify how their properties, again, it has broad implications. So I guess the 2-sentence summary would be picking important questions and pursuing those important questions.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's good. So in what specific ways, for the layman, have you been adaptive and creative in the field of science? What specific ways? I know you work with anesthesia. I know you've been a statistician. What specific ways have you added your flair to those fields?
Well, I think that if we start with like the circadian rhythms, I think right there was the main thing that I did was in looking at the data that were being recorded at those times, like looking at core temperature rhythms to track the circadian system in patients or in study subjects. I worked to give an accurate description of those oscillations. Okay. So trying to make the model capture the structure and the data as accurately as possible, and using what we call harmonic regression techniques to do that. But then not just stopping there, but developing a full inference framework. So you could measure the aspects of the rhythm, say the period, the amplitude, and then from there be able to make statements of uncertainty about, how confident we were about the characterizations that we came up with.
Wow.
So that allows you to have an inference framework. And then going on to some of the other work, like looking at neuroscience data, the same idea in principle, but there's a key concept there that I was able to take advantage of and use, and I've continued to use throughout my career, and that is neuroscience data, because you're recording from the brain and central nervous system, is dynamic. It changes over time. And you need statistical methods that also capture those changes over time for it to be accurate. And so those were things that I was practiced in, that I learned as part of my PhD training. So whereas most of the methods that were being used are static, and so then it becomes like a kludge to really use them. So by starting from a framework where I already had methods that were dynamic, that capture phenomena that change over time, I was able to develop more accurate descriptions of those sorts of data as well. So in other words, really understanding the properties of the data, really what the essential elements of the problem are. I think that's something which I tried to focus on, and that's, yielded me some measure of success to date.
Yeah, I would say so too. It did. So, how have you sort of found the right environment for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually? I think a lot of people aim or aspire to be at institutions such as Harvard and other institutions as well. So how did you know that was the right environment for you to thrive in scientifically and intellectually?
Well, I can't say that I knew it. I mean, I think I was just like any other student starting off at, like Harvard, really in many respects impressed by what the institution had to offer. But then once I was there, then saying, well, I really have to take advantage of this. And I remember specifically that when I was a junior and I was thinking about what I wanted to do for my research for senior thesis, Ken Wachter, who was a professor in the statistics department at the time, said, well, since you're thinking about going to medical school, you should probably write a thesis, an undergraduate thesis on a medical topic. And he suggested I go and talk with Professor Fred Mosteller about that particular issue, and work developing a research project with him, because he was a statistician who was working on studying outcomes from surgery, and that this would be a good idea for me to join a project like that. So that's what I did. So I guess the key thing was realizing that what sort of opportunities were there at Harvard, and then taking advantage of them, because you could certainly be there and not take advantage of opportunities that were there.
That's true.
I think one of the real things that I think it was the case at the time, I think it still continues to be the case, the opportunity to write a senior thesis with, a leading scholar in an area is something which, was amazingly beneficial for me for the long term. They got to watch up close and personal how, one of the top statisticians in the world did research. I got to see, how he thought, how he interacted with, other scientists, other physicians, with physicians, and it was very helpful for me to think about the sort of scientist, and in my case also physician, that I wanted to be, and the way I'd like to be able to do research. And being very specific, one thing about Professor Mosteller was that he could work with anybody. He could work with the best statisticians, the top physicians, graduate students, postdocs, but he could also work with undergraduates like me. And so having, just basically seeing that, and I can honestly say that's something I've tried to emulate.
Oh, wow. That's good. That's definitely good. So, you speak about your desire to attend medical school in your junior year. So how did you delineate or decide between MD, PhD, or MD? Because I think that's a challenge that a lot of people encounter. How did you differentiate whether you want to choose MD, PhD, or MD?
Well, I think what happened was I knew when I came to college that I wanted to go to medical school. That was for sure.
Okay.
And I can't remember exactly whether it was in my sophomore year or earlier that I decided I wanted to do a PhD also.
Okay.
And once I really fell in love with statistics, which was between sophomore and junior year, I decided I wanted to do my PhD in statistics, because I just I really liked statistics. It was just very powerful paradigm, very powerful framework, was and still is. And I just wanted to master that. And I thought that, but I also wanted to be a physician. And I thought, as opposed to just compromising and doing one or the other, why not do both? And that was how I just made the decision, which was a fairly avant-garde idea at the time, because when I entered the Harvard MD PhD program, nobody had done a PhD in statistics before. That was a rather new idea. There's a new idea there, but also in other programs in the country, because it was people looked at me with a lot of surprise when I said that's what I wanted to do my PhD in. But it was very clear to me that, medicine was a field that had a lot of uncertainty, a lot of data, and even more now. And having people who are formally trained in how to quantify that uncertainty and make decisions on uncertainty just seemed like a natural path. And that's what I just decided to do.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So given all your responsibilities and accomplishments, Dr. Brown, how do you maintain a balanced life? Or how do you strive to maintain balance?
Well, it's You know, I think, you know, family is first. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
And, you know, the accomplishments are basically, you know, fun, and they have no luster, you know, if your family isn't well taken care of and your family isn't happy. And so, you know, we spend a lot of time, you know, on, you know, downtime on the weekends, vacationing, you know, during the summer, spring, when the kids were younger, sort of making sure we took, you know, vacations during the 4 seasons. And, you know, my wife, like me, likes to travel. So and very often if I have trips to various places to give lectures, we turn them into sort of family outings also.
Okay.
So, and by doing that, it's made it possible to, you know, pursue activities that are relevant to my career, but also make sure that, you know, I'm not losing sight of my family.
Yeah, that's good. Priorities, having priorities. I've heard that in several interviews that having priorities that they do complement to maintaining balance. So what would you attribute to your success as a pioneer in the field, Dr. Brown? What would you attribute, what characteristic, what was it your upbringing as a child? Was it your time at Harvard? Or was it your belief system, your perspective on life? What would you say has complements your success as a pioneer in the field? Would it be mentorship?
I think that my parents and my family deserve tremendous credit for, you know, sort of setting me on the right track. And so, for example, I mean, both of my parents were teachers. They felt that education was very important.
Okay.
Anytime I wanted to do something or pursue something, they were always behind me. And then, you know, my brothers were always very, very good in school also.
Okay.
And so people would always say, well, you're going to be as good as your brother, you know, sort of things. That also created a certain amount of incentive. But not only my brothers, but my cousins too. They were also really very good in school. And so in other words, there were a number of, like, you know, sort of role models around, which I don't think we use that term then. We didn't think of them that way, but there were people you wanted to be like. So now we would call them role models, right?
Okay.
But, you know, one of my cousins, Robert Brown, who went to, you know, Carnegie Mellon, was a star basketball player, honor student, and he was always sitting around reading books, you know, during the summer. I mean, I mean, that's the image that I had of him. Or one of my cousins, who was, you know, who was when we were kids was teaching us lines from HMS Pinafore, you know, that sort of thing.
Wow.
And so the idea, so being smart was cool. Essentially, that was I think I really remember that idea. And like you know, the smarter you were in this environment around our family, kind of like, you know, the cooler you were.
Wow.
So and so I think that kind of instilled this in me. Or for example, like my oldest brother was a very good writer, and my middle brother was a physicist.
Wow.
And we're, you know, just a retired physicist now. So again, it didn't seem like that at the time, but they were implicitly setting bars, you know, for me to try to jump over just by what they were doing, you know, by example. So I think those are the origins, and then realizing once you had opportunities, you took advantage of them.
Yeah.
And then you have some serendipity. You have some people who realize that you have, you know, potential, and they try to help you realize it. Like my language teacher at Exeter, you know, Mr. Bagia, who spoke like 5 languages, and so I wanted to be like Mr. Bagia, you know, try to be as proficient in as many languages as he was. Yeah. Or for example, when I was an undergraduate at Harvard, one of the anesthesiologists there, Dr. Jack McPeak, you know, took an interest in me. He was one of my thesis advisors, and he's the first person who took me to the operating room. And then, you know, several years later, when I decided to go into anesthesiology, I was able to turn to him and get advice, and he helped me, you know, arrange to take, you know, a rotation in anesthesiology, and decided that that's what I wanted to go into. So in addition to, so it's a number of things. It's not just basically like any one thing.
That's fair.
But, you know, so I'd say some early on, some folks that I really looked up to. Later on, some folks who realizing and acknowledging my potential, who helped me out. And I was very grateful for that.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, so you spoke, and from my understanding, it seems like you grew up in a culture of excellence. Of course, I'm sure there were things that could have been improved on, but you said you grew up in an environment where it seems like everyone was pursuing excellence. What would you say? Would you say it was your parents or their brothers and sisters that contributed to that?
Oh yeah. For example, so my mother's family grew up in Pittsburgh, and my mother and her older sister. So my mother was one of 7 children.
Okay.
And so she was the second oldest, and her sister was extremely smart.
Okay.
Her older sister. My mother's extremely smart. She graduated from high school when she was 16.
Wow.
I remember my uncle, who was the next one in line, the third one, was saying to me, he says, your mother and your aunt Anita made it hard for me because they had done so well in school. I had to do well too. That sort of thing.
Okay.
And, on the other hand, my father was very industrious. I mean, he was someone who was orphaned. He was 14. He and his brother had lost both his parents. They were raised by their grandfather.
Wow.
But they had someone who, his grandfather, my great-grandfather, was this amazing guy. He was a minister, but he was also a gentleman farmer.
Okay.
And he owned this very large parcel of land, there in Florida, where I grew up, which we still own today.
Okay.
And that he was an amazingly industrious person. And I know that rubbed off on my father because my father was always doing stuff, both for the family, but also for the community. He was very committed to his community. So I think that, in fact, I know that, I inherited that perspective, those goals, those sorts of, the sort of can-do attitude that my father, always had. And I'll just give you one example.
Okay, I'm here to listen.
At the time, my father's grandfather wanted him to move back to Florida because after he got married, they lived in New York and in Pittsburgh. And he wanted him to move back because he wanted somebody living on their property. So my father decided to build a house. So this was in about 1957, 1958. And as you can imagine, my father couldn't get a loan from the bank to build a house. And as we know, one of the most important things entering into the American dream is to be able to build a house and lay down roots, right?
Yes, I agree.
So I didn't know this until many years later. He actually borrowed money from an auto body shop to build a house. He couldn't get a loan from the bank.
Wow.
And I remember when we paid off the note, I don't know, I must have been about 10 or 11 at the time. And I didn't quite understand everything, that was going on, but I subsequently figured out what had happened. But the thing is that because the conventional means that most, Americans would have used to build a house, getting a loan from the bank and doing that, wasn't available to him, he had to come up with another strategy that would work. And he did it. And so I think about that now. I mean, think about if he'd not been able to do that. Where would I be now if he hadn't done that? And so, but then taking from that, realizing that if people put obstacles in your way, you have to outthink them.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've seen myself do that like on a number of occasions, but that was probably one of the most, concrete examples because the people at the bank couldn't believe that an African American would want to build like a real house, like a solid, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bathrooms, living room, Florida room, outside porch, house. They figured we just had some idea of like a little shanty or something like that in mind, but that was far from what my father had imagined because he had studied industrial arts in college, so he knew how to build things. And with the help of his brother and his uncles, they actually built the house.
Wow, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'm learning a lot, Dr. Brown. So, how have you maintained vision and teamwork in your environment, in your lab, in your workspace in Mass General? How do you maintain vision and teamwork? How do you make sure that everyone's collaborating and seeing the big picture and trying to answer those important questions that you mentioned?
I think there are two things. I think one, you look for cool problems,
Okay.
and you get people excited about cool problems. I think that's the starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And then you let people loose and let them use their creativity to start working on them. You guide them.
Mm-hmm.
But at least this is what I like to do. I like to guide people to help them solve problems, and then pitch in, when they, need my help, because it allows them to develop their creative capacities and bring them to bear on a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably the most important thing, and also making it fun. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in many regards now I'm more a cheerleader than anything else. I'm not so much the person like doing the work. I'm just there, rah, rah, rah,
Yeah.
keeping them going and offering suggestions and making sure people aren't getting stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably the main thing that I do. And
Mm-hmm.
and I can honestly say it's fun. It's fun working with, it's watching people who are, many years my junior master concepts that I didn't master until I was like maybe 20 years older than they were. Like, wow, they know this stuff already. You can only imagine what they can do or what they'll be able to do, going on into the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so just sitting there marveling at that and trying to facilitate that is a real pleasure. And I try to keep that going on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, wow. So as we start to wrap up, you mentioned how being smart was cool. I can be wrong with this. However, I'm not sure if that's the prevailing message in many instances or in many circles. So what would you say could complement a change in that dynamic? Where it's not just the athletic environments that have a lot of attraction to them for young people, but academic environments as well. How can we make that a more prevailing message? That intellectual curiosity and intellectual development is worth the time and effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really have to. I mean, I'm clearly biased because I'm an academic and I'm in science, and I feel strongly that people should know about academics and science and those sorts of things. But I think that I'm indebted to you for taking time to talk to somebody like me to allow me to tell my story. Because it's more exciting to hear about Jason Tatum having scored 50 points and won the game for the Celtics than I might hear about what I'm doing. So and that's just the realities of it.
That's true.
But, however, being able to, like, for example, I have three, after my father, I have like three additional heroes in mathematics. One is Benjamin Banneker, the black mathematician who laid out DC. He's the first person to really characterize the cycles of the circadia, the insects which come out every 17 years. So he was really, and he did this over something like 4 or 5 cycles. So he started when he was 17.
Okay.
And so he was probably the country's first data scientist when you think about it. Or another person is Katherine Johnson. When I learned about her, I was just like blown away. Basically the woman mathematician, African-American woman mathematician, who worked out the flight trajectories for the early Mercury and I think also Gemini space missions. I mean, just think about it. She did the calculations by hand.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, that's just like unreal. And the third person who actually had the good fortune to meet is David Blackwell. He was African-American professor at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, professor of statistics. I mean, just like an amazing mind, soft-spoken, just totally respected because he was just so brilliant. First African-American elected to the National Academy of Sciences in 1964. So more than 100 years after the academy was actually set up, the first African-American was elected. It was he. So, I think about, people like that, and I'm saying, gosh, if I can be anything like those guys, so, I clearly the accomplishments of a LeBron James or Magic Johnson are the things that are often talked about, but like in my realm, I see somebody like these people, and they're my heroes, and those are the people I aspire to be like.
Yeah, that's good. So, as we conclude, do you have any advice to those wanting to pursue the field you are currently working in? So, budding scientists, what advice would you give to those wanting to pursue the field you are currently working in, whether it be statistics or medicine or just a PhD in general?
I think that try to get involved and gain experience early.
Okay.
I can tell you, I get letters almost every day from students asking to come and work in my group.
Okay.
Literally, and of different ages, all the way from junior high school, up through, high school, college, postdocs. And I'm amazed at what some of these students have told me they already know. They're not, some of them are from the United States, some are not. They're from outside, from basically, effectively the four corners of the earth. And so, but realizing that that's what people do and not being bashful about doing that. And if the first time you write somebody, you don't hear from them, no big deal. Keep going. If you want to go, right? Because it's you're trying to create, because all you need is one opportunity to sort of get your foot in the door. Once you have that and you realize, and the other opportunities will open up. And you can see that this is something that students from a number of different backgrounds are actually doing now. I think that students in general, particularly perhaps, underrepresented minority students, feel free to take the same approach.
I agree. Completely agree. So what has been some of the most beneficial advice you have received, Dr. Brown, as we conclude? What is the most beneficial advice or piece of the beneficial advice that you received, either from your parents, as you mentioned, they were very industrious and intelligent, even from your colleagues or professors? What has been some of the most beneficial advice you have received? Whatever works.
The most, I think a number of things. I think, just in watching like my parents, just like working hard and also, but then encouraging intellectual pursuits, and I think I certainly have picked up on that and tried to amplify that. I just remember my mother saying at one point, like I told you, she was extremely smart. And, it was very clear she lived vicariously through us, the things that we were able to accomplish, not only me, but my brothers as well. And one point in sort of a more candid moment, she said, if I had had opportunities, I'm sure I could have been, a lot more than I am now.
Yeah, I've heard that same sentiment from
and that, as well. That kind of stuck with me and just sort of said, well, I have an obligation to try to be as successful as I possibly can, because my mother made it possible for me to get to where I am now. And she sacrificed a lot to be where she was. And I should basically do the same thing. And then a complimentary idea. I just remember my uncle saying once that, it never hurts to be nice. And so if you can help somebody, why not?
I know, right?
Just that simple, not deep, but just, and it can take on many forms. It can just be meeting someone on the street to helping someone with their career. So I think somewhere in there is some of the best advice I've received. There are probably other things, but they don't come to mind right now.
That's fair. Well, Dr. Brown, thank you so much for joining me today. It was good to have you on.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, David. I really appreciate it.
Chemistry conceptual developments. So today we're going to be introducing or talking about regiochemistry principles. So key things you want to keep in mind are you want to understand the fundamentals of regiochemistry, understand Markovnikov's rule and the anti-Markovnikov's rule, and we want to try and understand Zaitsev's and Hoffman's rule. So regiochemistry principles and other ideas. Regiochemistry comes from the Latin word regionum, meaning direction. Regiochemistry describes the principles involved in the directionality or position and placement of reactants to form products. Regiochemistry is very important. We normally hear in advanced or high-level discussions of things being regioselective or regiodivergent or it's used a lot. So the reagents used can cause a specific regiochemical result or result in the opposite of what would normally occur. Markovnikov's rule. Markovnikov's rule, put simply, is he who has more gets more. Markovnikov's rule in the addition of a halide to an unsymmetrical alkene, typically in the addition of a halide to an unsymmetrical alkene, the hydrogen goes to the carbon with the greatest number of hydrogens and the halide ion goes to the other carbon. In another way, this rule states that the halide adds so as to form the more stable carbocation intermediate. Anti-Markovnikov. Anti-Markovnikov is the reverse. He who has more gets less, in which the carbon with the greatest number of hydrogens does not receive the hydrogen, but the most electrophilic portion of the molecule. For example, in hydroboration oxidation in the presence of peroxides, the borohydrate adds to the less substituted carbon of the hydrogen, and the hydrogen adds to the more substituted carbon. In short, now mechanistically, it may occur slightly, it's a little bit more involved and more detailed, but in short, that's what we're going to say occurs. However, stability comes about because the electron density shifts from the electrophilic borohydride, resulting in it possessing a partially negative charge and the more substituted carbon possessing a partially positive charge. This is indeed stable due to the electron density donating capacity of the alkyl group, S character, and orbital overlap of the alkynyl carbon. The alkynyl group with the alkyl or electron donating substituent provides stability. Zaitsev's rule. Zaitsev's rule is a directionality principle in which the more substituted alkene is favored to the use of a small base, such as ethoxide. Zaitsev's rule is very significant and aids in predicting products and elimination reactions. Hoffman's rule. Hoffman's rule is another directionality principle in which the less substituted alkene is favored to the use of a huge or large base, such as straight butoxide. Hoffman's rule is also very significant and aids in predicting elimination reactions. Hammond-Leffler postulate. The Hammond-Leffler postulate essentially states that the product resembles the molecular arrangement of the transition state. In simpler terms, the view on the potential energy hill continues in some ways as you follow through the potential energy journey. So progressing in that direction, we're going to talk about some new stuff today. Again, surveying the literature and looking at the work of Shantanu Roy, Stefan Godeka, and Vladimir Hellman, we embark on the journey of the Bell-Evans-Polanyi principle. So typically, or in short, the Bell-Evans-Polanyi principle is valid for a chemical reaction that proceeds along the reaction coordinate over the transition state. And that concept is extended to molecular dynamics trajectories that in general do not cross the dividing surface between the initial and final local minima at the exact transition state. It's very important and it has a lot of implications. It's a conceptual tool in physical chemistry, and we have come to understand that this principle can be used to improve the efficiency of existing molecular dynamics-based methods by tuning the energy of these molecular dynamic trajectories. Along with that, we'll be discussing the Dimroth principle, or Dimroth rearrangements. These are frequently encountered in heteroaromatic chemistry and was first recognized in the triazole series. This term was coined in 1963 as a convenient way of referring to the isomerization proceeding by ring fission and subsequent recyclization, whereby a ring nitrogen and its attached substituent exchange place with an amino group in a position alpha to it. Moving right along, we'll discuss a mechanistic highlight. Today we'll be talking about the Suzuki cross-coupling reaction. The Suzuki cross-coupling, or the Suzuki-Miura cross-coupling, is a type of palladium catalyzed cross-coupling reaction. CC bond formation using aryl halides and organoboronic acids. It is one of the most important reactions in synthetic organic and medicinal chemistry. There are two suggested pathways: the oxo-palladium pathway is a preferred mechanism, as some may say, and the Boronic pathway is another description of what occurs. Of course, these occur through catalytic cycles, and this reaction was likely first described around 1979. In 2010, Akira Suzuki, jointly with Richard F. Heck and Ichi Negishi, received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for the development of palladium catalyzed cross-coupling reactions. Wrapping up the highlight section, we'll talk about Nobel highlights. So Savant Arrhenius. Savant Arrhenius was born on February 19, 1859, near Uppsala, Sweden. He received the Nobel Prize on December 10, 1903, in recognition of his theory of electrolytic dissociation. His father, Savant Gustav Arrhenius, held a position at the University of Uppsala. His uncle, Johann Arrhenius, was a botanist, writer, and a longtime secretary of the Swedish Agricultural Academy in Stockholm. Savant Arrhenius was an outstanding student in school. He learned reading and arithmetic at a very early age, and in his secondary school excelled particularly in mathematics and physics. His physics teacher was M. Floderus, author of the most popular contemporary Swedish secondary school physics textbook. His university degrees were all from the University of Uppsala. Definitely a chemist that worked hard. This ends the session of highlights for this podcast episode. Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is The New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guests and I. It's hard to find creative ways to keep the kids busy and screen-free while stretching their brains, especially these days. Mel Science does all the legwork for you, so you can spend more quality time tackling projects together, and they won't even know they're learning. With Mel Science, there's something for every kid. We've just received some awesome Mel chemistry sets, but also there is Mel Kids, Mel Physics, Mel Med, and Mel STEM sets, and they are all for different age groups. We can't wait to get started with the kit we have received. Get 60% off your first box of any of the subscriptions by using the promo code CHEMIST for the first month for any of Mel Science's subscriptions, but it will only be active for 1 month. You can find the link in the episode description. Welcome to the New Chemist podcast. We're glad you listened. Feel free to download this podcast on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many other platforms, including Odyssey. Here on The New Chemist, we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as careers, community, research, and COVID-19. We're happy you're tuning in. My guest today is Chadwin Hanna. Thanks for joining me today. It is so good to hear from you. Just briefly, I'll inform my audience about you. Chadwin is a good colleague of mine. We went to high school together. He was the former head boy before I was the head boy in 2014. He was the head boy in 2013. Chadwin is a graduate of Kettering University, where he majored in mechanical engineering with a specialty in bioengineering applications. He also has a minor in biochemistry. He comes from a diverse cultural background, having received his secondary education in Freeport, the Bahamas, at the great Bishop Michael Eldon School, and pursued his post-secondary studies in the USA.
He is determined to use his knowledge of engineering and the human body to leave a lasting impact on the world of medicine and most importantly, the lives of people for whom this industry exists. Like I said earlier, Chadwin's a good colleague and a good friend of mine. It is a pleasure and an honor to have such a bright young man on this podcast today. Thank you so much, Chadwin, for joining me today. It's so good to have you on as a guest. Well, me and Chadwin go way back to high school, all the way back to high school. And he was a former head boy before me, and I was head boy after him. And we also knew each other from just being in science together. So, Chadwin, as we begin, what have been your long-standing interests in the field of science?
So, thanks for having me on the podcast. Great that we could connect like this. But science, like you said, from high school, we were kind of always interested in science together, you know, from as early as I can remember. I think I had a desire to be a physician. And that just like led into this interest that I had in science, whether it was biology, chemistry. It's like, I want to be a doctor, and medicine is very cool to me. So I just gravitated to all the fields of science. Eventually that led to me going to do my bachelor's and become a mechanical engineer. And that led me down a whole other path into the medical device industry and really understanding how things work, being an innovator. And now I find myself right back in medical school, where what I wanted to do from, like I said, as far as I can remember. So it's always been science, man.
That's very good. That's very good. So my question to you is, I want to hit on like immediately. How do you maintain view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general? So when you face challenges and obstacles, which I'm sure you have, how do you maintain view of the bigger picture and keep your goal in focus?
I think a big thing for me is knowing what my goal is, right? And if you don't have a clear picture of your goal before you set out on your journey, then it's even not much harder to keep it in sight. You don't know what you're looking at. Okay. For me, before I went to undergrad, I knew like, hey, I want to be a neurosurgeon. And I knew, I didn't necessarily know the path that I would take to get there, but I knew like, hey, this is what I want to do. That path took me, like I said, through Kettering University. I studied mechanical engineering, did a minor in biochemistry. When I graduated from Kettering, I ended up in Miami working for Johnson & Johnson as an R&D engineer, making neurovascular devices for stroke treatment, which was an offset of what I eventually want to do as a physician. But I was able to look at it from a completely different perspective as an engineer. Okay. So I think with the bigger goal in mind that, hey, I want to be a neurosurgeon, right? Like I was taking a step back and making the devices that neurosurgeons use, so that later on in my career, like this will make me an even better neurosurgeon because I know how to make the tools and I know how to use them. Yeah. So I think it's just keeping the vision in mind and not necessarily getting caught up in the past, right? I know a lot of undergrads going into medical school, they get kind of stressed when it comes to gap years and understanding like, hey, like I need to get to medical school ASAP. I don't want a gap year, or I just want one gap year. I took 4 gap years. That wasn't like planned. That wasn't in the plan, right? But I got into something. I loved what I was doing, and I was learning, and I was in an environment where I could really like grow and flourish. And it was something that I thought I needed to do before going to med school, and I love it. I think it made me a better person, but always have the bigger goal in mind. Like I said, keep it on your head, and everything that you do should be in progress of that goal. Everything.
Yeah, I completely agree. Precision. Yeah. As you hit around the target, you come closer and closer to the ultimate precision. So how have you been adaptive and creative in the fields of science? In what way? You served as an R&D engineer. Are you currently still serving as an R&D engineer?
Yeah, so I'm currently still spending a few hours working with my R&D colleagues at J&J. Okay, which good. Has been a blessing, right? It's it's time balance. I'm in medical school. I'm in an MD PhD program. And I'm still doing some work in the field. I mean, it's great for me because I get to use two different sides of my brain, studying all this medicine, like really science side, but I'm also still doing some engineering, which is great. But I think to answer your question, it's I just kind of take it day by day, you know. Like every day looks a little different.
Okay.
And you just kind of gotta be. For me, I take it day by day so as to not stress myself out with the like enormity of the tasks that there are to face, right? Knowing, like I said, keeping the big goal and picture is great. Keep it in mind, keep it in focus, but at the same time, it's hard to look at that all the time. It's hard to look at this huge, grandiose thing. Sometimes you just got to take it apart and look at it section by section. That's what I try to do, day by day.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So, because I've heard several things. You have to be pragmatic. There's a quote that says, "If you want to eat an elephant, eat it one bite at a time." And also, when it comes to anatomy, unless you're doing gross anatomy, most times you look at anatomy like one system at a time, one part of the body at a time, so you can really understand what's going on. So yeah, I completely agree with you. So how do you seek or find the right environment for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually? What led you to Johnson & Johnson? How did you get there? And also what led you to the UF? And how did you get there as an MD PhD candidate?
Cool. I think a big thing for me, I'll tell a story in a minute, but I think the biggest thing is the people, man. In order to learn, I think two things have to be true. One, you have to be in a mental space and understand that you want to learn. So you have to have the desire to learn. And two, you have to be in an environment that fosters your learning, right? If both of those things aren't there, then learning isn't going to happen. It isn't something that just happens. You can't just sit in the classroom and learn if you don't want to be there. You're not going to learn. You also can't just sit in the classroom. Even if you want to learn and the environment isn't great, you're not going to learn.
And you have the capability as well.
Right. You got to have the capability. So for me, one of the big things I look at is the environment. Like, is this a space where I can grow, where I can learn, and where the people are going to help me to foster my growth and my learning? So for me, while I was in school, I was co-oping for a company called Ethicon Endosurgery, which was also part of Johnson & Johnson at the time. That's when I first got into the medical device industry. I was making laparoscopic devices. I was like doing R&D, engineering work, research and design as a sophomore in college.
Okay, good.
It was great, right? So right there, I was working with a group of people that really trusted my ability, trusted the things that I was doing, and allowed me and gave me the space to grow, learn, make mistakes, right? But also make my thoughts and my opinions be heard, which I think is
very important.
Amazing. Yeah. It's extremely important. It's like one to be heard and seen, right? So I stayed at Ethicon for a while. I actually did 4 different rotations there because, like I said, the environment was amazing, and I just love working for J&J as a company, the credo of the company, what it stands for, and I understood like, hey, I'm doing engineering because I want to help people, and I'm doing it in the medical device field. And this is going to benefit my career later. So after I graduated, I wanted to stay with J&J. Unfortunately, I didn't have an opportunity to go back to Ethicon. So I was looking, which ended up being great for me in the long term. I found this company in Miami called Cerenovis, and they designed neurovascular devices. It was a J&J company. I applied and I got like an interview in like a week. They told me to fly down there. I flew down there, and the environment was like, it was electric. I walk in the lab, there's engineers working. They have doctors visiting very often. People are bouncing information back and forth. People are asking me what I think about things that are going on, and I'm just there for an interview. So I'm like, this is an environment that would be great for me. That's kind of why I ended up there.
Sounds good.
Because, like I said, it's all the people, the environment, people able to foster your growth and your learning. Yeah, and that's also why I ended up at UF. UF, when I was looking at MD PhD programs, I really wanted something that's collaborative, where physicians are working with researchers, where like people are on the cutting edge of science. There's a lot of clinical studies going on. People are actually actively trying to make a difference in the field, and UF was the fit for me.
Good, good. Having a strong sense of agency and also having the capacity to jump from one S curve to the next. So as you learn and plateau, you learn, gain the skills, plateau, become comfortable in the environment, and you jump to another one where you're jumping S curve to S curve. That's good. It's very good.
Yeah.
So what have been your most effective and impactful ideas to date? What have you complemented to in terms of, so let me make this more practical. So you worked at J&J. Yeah, you worked at J&J.
Yeah.
How did you add your flair to the environment? What complemented you adding your flair?
That's a good question. I'm always me, and I think that's great. I found that for me as an engineer, I'm an innovator, and I love to be efficient.
How did you do that?
I had just kind of like what I said about the goal, having a big goal and breaking it into chunks.
Granularities.
Like, if I see a task, I have to break it into smaller pieces. I have to. I had a mentor at Ethicon that called me an optimizer, because anytime she'd give me a problem, I'd be like, there has to be an easier way to do this. Like that, there has to be an easier way to do it. And that's how I face problems daily. If something is going on, I'm like, wait, there has to be an easier way to do this. There has to be a more efficient way to do it. If it's a process,
the hill to climb, eh?
Right. If there's a process, let's say in manufacturing, I'm like, wait, only one person can do this. How can we optimize it so that multiple people can do it? How can we get it done quicker? And you asked, how do I add my flair in that environment? I think that one of the most important things, especially in regards to innovation, whether it's science or industry, is just having diversity of thought and diversity of everything. Diversity is so important. Me, of course, I was the only, at the time, I was the only Black R&D engineer working in that office in Miami, which is great. And I was like the youngest person working there as well as an R&D engineer. Of course, I was the only person from the Bahamas. So all these different factors of diversity just influenced the way that I was thinking completely differently from everyone else, right? I think that is so important. So if I'm forming a team, I'm always thinking about, like, where can I grab diversity from? Who's thinking differently than I am? I don't want a bunch of Chadwins on my team, even though I think I'm great. I don't want a bunch.
Nothing wrong with that, bro. I feel the same way.
I want like as many different people as possible. So, and I work with people who really care about what I have to say.
Yeah, that's
and good. I think that's like a part of respect, and also trust. Trust in that, like, I know what I'm talking about when I say something.
Yeah,
it's hard to find that. You could work forever and like don't find a group of people that trust you.
Yeah, that's true. And so several things come up. One, you have to build your voice, and you build your voice through having a good grasp of your field and having good acumen and good knowledge and good skills that are relevant to the area of expertise or the area that you're working in. So that's one thing that comes up. Trust. I've heard people say the success of an organization goes, or is one of the factors that complements the success is trust. And the speed of trust in the environment influences the path and trajectory of the organization. That's that. 2. And then 3, what you said you brought up a key point, being yourself, you know? We could all try to be someone else, but at the end of the day, the best person we can be, and I think this is an established fact, is yourself. There's something unique in your personhood that complements you being able to do that well. So that's good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
So how do you maintain a balanced life given all your responsibilities and accomplishments? Are you balanced, Chadwin?
I try to be, man.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So how do you manage it? How do you manage your time? How do you manage your workload? That's a practical way to do this. To answer this question.
So for me, currently, like being in an MD PhD program, when I started, I mean, obviously I was living in Miami. I had a lot of free time. working in industry. As soon as I got off of work, I was off work, and I really took time to have like mental space to myself. So being out of school for 4 years, coming back into what I know is a really intense program, I'm not sacrificing my own mental health. I'm just not. Like, I understand that medical school is hard. And some people would say like, oh, like I'm being arrogant or I'm being cocky because I'm not sacrificing my mental health, but I'm just not. So, because a lot of people do, because a lot of people feel like that's the only way that you can make it in medical school. You have to be up and study for 12 hours every day or 14 hours. If you're not studying on the weekends, then what are you doing? But I think that everyone has to find their niche and understand what they need to do in order to succeed. And for me, what I've found like in this environment is that people compare themselves to others. Like, I need to be studying this much, or I need to be studying in this way, and don't really take the time to find what works for them. So a big thing for me is like I said, I wasn't in school for like 4 years. So coming into it, I really tried to figure out like what's gonna work for me. Am I gonna go to class? So I started to go to class every day. Mm-hmm. Like, is this gonna work for me? Mm-hmm. And then some days I would sit home and watch lectures from the computer. I'm like, this doesn't work for me. I need to be in class every day. This is active learning that I'm doing. I have an exam every 2 weeks. I'm like, how am I gonna study for this? Am I gonna study every night? No, that's kind of stressful for me. Let me develop a schedule, develop a plan, and like I know when I'm gonna go through this material. That's been really helpful for me.
It's good, dude.
Like I said, I've been planning. I have time for myself in my planner, which I think is extremely important. If you don't make the time for your own mental health, then it won't exist.
Wow. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So, dude, I completely agree with you. You know, mental health is so important. 1, 2, you made the joke of if you're not sacrificing your mental health, and you said some people might say it's arrogant or cocky. Dude, you know, at the end of the day, people will say what they have to say. You have to live with you. So I don't pay it no mind. But people's opinions have merit, but it doesn't float or sink your boat, eh? So the reality is, this is the thing that I think, or what you said is so important. You said people compare themselves a lot in that environment. My thing is, this is the question I raised for instances like that. If academic merit is comparative in the absolute sense, what happens when the things you're comparing are gone? Does the merit still exist? You have to have some type of you have to have some individual merit in that you are trying to be a better you. That's another way to put that. You're trying to be a better person, just a better version of you every single day. So that's good.
Yeah.
How have you maintained?
You got to show up as you every day, man.
Yeah. I agree with you. My thing is, if the only time you can have merit is when you compare, what's the point? How have you maintained vision and teamwork in your environment?
Like I said earlier, I think, especially in engineering, it's like teamwork is like you can't do anything by yourself. I learned that a long time ago. It's the same, and I can't name one thing where you can actually do something alone. You can't. Medicine is like that. Science is like that. And I already explained about having diverse minds and people from different backgrounds on your team. What I think it really is understanding how to work well as a team, right? So you can bring all these different people together, but if you don't have a structure of like, how do we flow together? What are the responsibilities of each person? How do these people work together and be as efficient as possible to deal with the task at hand? Then that's a problem. So really, when it's like teamwork is the lifestyle. Like nothing exists but teamwork. I think I spent a lot of time in my team really trying to be as efficient as possible, using each person's skills, expertise to like really promote and like bring the task at hand to fruition, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree.
I try to show up as like the best person that I can within that team as well, right? Because I'm there for a reason. So like, what do you need me to do? how can I use my expertise to make this happen?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, dude. It's very important. So, do you have any advice to those wanting to pursue the field you're currently working in? What's your advice to people listening?
My advice is just, especially for those applying to MD PhD programs, extremely difficult to get it.
Yeah.
An MD program, it's hard. It's getting harder to become a doctor. Like I'm talking to professors and they're like, it's just hard. It's hard. I've talked to professors and they're like, I don't know if I would get into medical school today. Like, kudos to you guys. And I think in generations coming, it's just gonna be harder and harder. So for me, this is actually, I applied to MD PhD program twice. I didn't get accepted in the last cycle. I got accepted in this cycle. And the fact that I reapplied shows the one thing that I would give people advice to is know what you want to do and keep on doing it. Yeah. You can't let failures stop you from achieving your goals. You just can't. You have to be persistent.
Yeah, bro.
You have to have some level of grit because it is hard.
You have to be stubborn.
You have to be stubborn because people are gonna try to stop you.
You will have obstacles.
People will drop walls in front of you to stop you.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. But see, the thing with that, I acknowledge that. When this is how I approach things like that, you could throw the obstacles in my path. At the end of the day, you're not sovereign. My faith perspective kicks in for that. So yeah, it's just an obstacle. It's just a hill to climb. So what has been some of the most beneficial advice you have received? What's some good advice you've gotten from your parents or teachers, professors? What's helped you get through hard times? What goes through your mind when someone drops a wall in your path?
It's my dad would always tell me to not ever let anyone stop you from achieving your goals. Yeah, and that reverberates in my head daily. Okay. I will never let anyone tell me that I cannot do something.
Oh yeah.
Right? I mean, of course, work within the guise of what's capable. Is this realistic? Can you set realistic goals for yourself? Yes. And if I think it's realistic versus if you think it's realistic, then we have a clash, right? I'm never gonna let you prove me wrong, unless it is something that's not realistic. And that in that regard, you have to know when to humble yourself as well.
It is important. Right? Yeah, it's very important.
You have to know when, am I overreaching? And you have to give space for someone to actually come in and tell you, hey, maybe you are doing a little bit too much. Let me explain why, right? Which takes a lot. Because I just said I won't let anyone ever come in my way of doing something that I want to do. But at the same time, there's a balance. And I don't know everything. I just don't.
Neither do I. And that's okay.
I just don't.
Just keep learning. It's a growth. Beneficial. Sorry for cut you off, but the beneficial mindset, I think, is a growth mindset. It's healthy, especially in these spaces. So, as you were saying, you said it's a balance, right?
Yeah, it's a balance. What I was gonna say is, you might have a wall in front of you, and you might want to climb that wall, or you might want to go through that wall, but someone knows what's on the other side of the wall, and they're like, wait, maybe you want to plan a little bit before you just go ahead and jump. You got to be able to listen to that person.
Yeah, you have to be teachable. I completely agree. You have to be teachable. You have to give space for the right influences to have influence in your life. Yeah, that's good. So, man, Chabin, thank you so much for joining me today. It was so good to have you on as a guest. Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is The New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guests and I. Welcome to the New Chemist podcast. We're glad you're listening. Feel free to download this podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, Amazon Music, and a variety of other platforms. Here on the New Chemist, we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as careers, community research, and COVID-19. We're happy you're tuning in. My guest today is a good colleague and friend of mine, Kyle Wong. Thanks for joining me today. It is so good to hear from you. Just briefly, I'll inform my audience about you. Starting off at GE as a software test engineering intern, he progressed to Twilio as a software engineering intern. Then he progressed even more, serving also as an OMED team coach, then as a software engineer. Then he served as a co-founder and CTO at Shopper, also as a fellow at On Deck, and he is a part of the founding team, and he's the VP of Product and Engineering at Overflow. He was also recognized as a Forbes 30 Under 30. He is really accomplished, a good colleague and friend of mine from Georgia Tech. Please welcome Kyle Wong. Thank you, Kyle, so much for joining me today. It's so good to have an accomplished guest such as you on this podcast. Just before we begin, Kyle Wong is a Forbes 30 Under 30 recordee, or he was recognized under Forbes 30 Under 30, as well as he's a part of the founding team and VP of Product and Engineering at Overflow. He's very accomplished. He was one of my buddies at Georgia Tech. Person of color, served well. He's majoring in computer science. Really smart guy. Really good to have him as a guest. So as we get started, what would you say have been your long-standing interest in the field of computer science?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. Super excited to be on here. And yeah, some of my long-standing interests in the field of computer science, like I can remember just being a kid. Maybe I don't remember the exact year, but whenever the iPod came out, I had to have this iPod, and just using it, I was intrigued. I'm like, how can I listen to music from this little device, right? And that has just always been interested in me, and how these products shape society. And so for the longest, I just always wanted to be an engineer at Apple. And so as I grew up and grew older, my parents noticed that I had kind of this knack for technology, and so they cultivated that through various summer programs and things like that. And that really helped expose me to the world of computer science, and how essentially you can tell a computer to do something, and even build businesses off of being able to code. And so that has always inspired me, and inspired everything I've done up until this point.
Okay, yeah, that's good, man. That's good. So, what would you say? What led to your desire to work in the field of computer science? Was it your upbringing? Was it the school you went to? How did that desire come about? And you mentioned your parents cultivated it, but how did the desire come about?
Yeah, I would say like that, the iPod, right? Seeing that, okay. And then just also just seeing all the cool things you could do about coding. There would be TV shows where people are fake coding, but it's just still that exposure. Yeah. And I just thought it was really cool. I've always been really good at math. Okay. Although computer science isn't at least software engineering isn't, a lot of it, some of it uses math concepts, but not on a day-to-day basis. I'm not using that, but I've just always been an analytical thinker. Okay. And so being analytical, and when thinking about career paths, when we were I want to say we got a computer at my home when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. And so okay. My dad was always on the computer on AOL and stuff like that. And so this is new technology, and so I was just fascinated, and I just wanted to know how computers worked and all of that. And so just the plethora of exposure that I had from having a computer at home, and all those other things just really inspired me to want you can make a career by working on a computer. I thought that was cool. And then look at it today, everyone uses computer for their day-to-day job. whether or not you're, you know, a computer scientist or programmer, or even if you're, you know, in business, like have a strictly business kind of role. Like everyone uses a computer. And so I knew that's why I wanted to, you know, be in this computer science field.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, man. That's really good. So, yeah, that's really good. So you saw people using it. You had instances in your life where you had samples of those technologies. That's good. So, Kyle, my question to you, I think most people when they see a LinkedIn profile, the question is, how have you been so successful? You were recognized by very notable magazine, Forbes 30 under 30. So, how have you done it? What has complemented to it? Can you describe to us the path to getting there? And how did you overcome the obstacles when you encountered them? Would you just share a brief story as to how did the academic path first, and then we can talk about the obstacles. So the academic path.
Yeah. So the path. So when I went to Georgia Tech, so in the summer after my junior year, no, it was summer after my sophomore year of high school. Okay. I did this program at Georgia Tech through, it was called LEAD at the time. Now it's called Summer Engineering Institute. And I believe it's still around. Okay. And what they do is they bring about maybe like 30 to 40 minority students, Black and Latinx students from around the US to Georgia Tech. And you're there for 4 weeks on campus. And essentially you're kind of like taking classes. And so I'm a high schooler, and for me, like even just attending Georgia Tech seemed like a reach. Like I didn't think it was possible. I'm originally from Decatur, Georgia, and not many people from like where I grew up, my high school, you know, would go to four-year universities, let alone Georgia Tech. And so I had that exposure after my sophomore year of high school through that program, and they exposed us to not only like computer science, but also like chemical engineering, and it was more so like just about engineering. Like what are the different fields and paths you can take in engineering? And I always resonated with like the computer science kind of computer devices type thing. And so when I entered Georgia Tech, I started off as computer engineering major, and the difference between computer engineering and computer science is that computer engineering is more hardware focused, whereas computer science is more software focused. So I always thought I wanted to do hardware, but the curriculum at Georgia Tech for computer engineering was very electrical engineering based. And so a lot of the classes that electrical engineers had to take, like digital signal processing, computer engineers had to take. And like I didn't really like the hardware classes. I always thought I would, but I didn't really enjoy them. I didn't do the best in those. And you know, I had a friend that had an internship after his freshman year at Google in Mountain View, California, which is Silicon Valley. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So after my sophomore year, I didn't have an internship after my freshman year, but after my sophomore year, or during my sophomore year, I actually switched from computer engineering to computer science. And I had the opportunity to get an internship at GE in Salem, Virginia. It's a very small town. It was a cool internship, but I felt like I didn't learn a whole lot. And I realized the next internship I wanted to be in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley, because I just feel like that's the heart of technology. And so every year, Georgia Tech has a career fair, and they have one specifically for the College of Computing. Yeah. And so the year is 2014. You know, I had gone to the College of Computing career fair before. Every big company you could think of is there. You know, you have Microsoft, Google,
the all these. Of Klaus?
You said what?
The lobby of Klaus?
Exactly. Yeah, and Klaus. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And so you have all these big tech companies, and you know, you'll wait in line for like an hour because everyone wants to talk to these companies. You're missing class, and you know, you'll wait in line for an hour. You talk to a recruiter for like maybe 5 minutes, then they just say apply online. And so it was like one of those, you know, it was just like, dang, I just not wasted all this time, but you know, I stood in line, missed class, just to apply online in this huge pool of candidates. So in 2014, I'm like, I was going to do it differently. So they have the smaller companies on the bottom floor. Mm-hmm. And so Twilio was one of those companies at the time. And at the time, I didn't even know what Twilio was. And for reference, Twilio is a cloud communications platform. So their API or their service essentially powers text messages and phone calls. So if you've ever gotten like text messages from like a business or say like appointment reminders from a doctor, all of those they're leveraging Twilio's technology to actually send those messages out. Or if you get like those automated calls, sometimes people abuse it, and so sometimes they're like spam calls through Twilio. But they really try to limit, like they have like a fraud detection team, and they're very strict about their policy. But of course, people are always going to abuse it. But anyway, I'm in this line. I talked to a recruiter from Twilio, and long story short, I'm able to finesse an interview. And I get the interview, and the interview goes well. And they were smaller at the time, and so I had to like keep following up. I'm like, hey, I really wanted this internship.
Persistence. And
I had an opportunity from Boeing as well for an internship. It would have been in Long Beach, California, which is in Southern California. But Boeing is, it's an aviation company, and I wasn't necessarily. I didn't want to be in aviation. I wanted to be in like high tech, Okay. And so that's why I kept following up about the Twilio opportunity. Yeah. And then they scheduled a few more interviews for me, which were like over like video. Right. And I did well, and I had the opportunity. I got an offer to intern at Twilio. So I interned there summer 2015 and summer 2016. And then after I graduated from Georgia Tech in December 2016, I moved out to the Bay Area to work for Twilio full time. And so I worked at Twilio for about 3 years, and I've always wanted to, pursue startups. But, I was like, after graduating, I had student loans and stuff like that. And it's just, I felt it would be hard to even pursue a business of my own if, with student loans. And so I'm like, okay, I want to get this taken care of. So I had the opportunity, through working at Twilio to like pay off my student loans. And then there came a time where I felt like I wasn't growing as much. And instead of like switching teams or like going to a new company, I'm like, this could be an opportunity for me to, start something of my own. I'm like, I'm young, I don't have any dependents. And so a friend of mine reached out to me about an opportunity that she was working on. It was her and her college roommate. It was very early. It was called Shopper. And they were looking for a technical co-founder. And the idea of Shopper was like on-demand delivery for clothes. So think like Uber Eats, but for clothes. So so that was like the idea. But and so we applied to like Y Combinator, which is a startup accelerator. We didn't get in, but one thing they really wanted to understand was like, why do people need this, right? And we just hadn't done exactly. We hadn't done enough customer research, and then with businesses like that, like those kind of like delivery businesses, the logistics are difficult. You have to be efficient, and then also the unit economics don't make the most sense. Most delivery companies are unprofitable because, they're charging customers less than it really costs to actually do the job, right? And so that's why, you see a lot of these companies like Uber, they raise a bunch of venture funding to be able to cover those losses. And so we worked on that for a little bit, but we realized we weren't the right team to make it happen. And so walked away from it. And, when I left Twilio, I had given myself a year to try to figure things out. And so I left Shopper after about 3 months, and, I was just like, what's next? And I connected with, so when I first moved to San Francisco, I went to this church, I still go to it. It's called Vibe Church. And one of the co-founders of the church had just started a location in San Francisco. The main location is in Palo Alto, which is maybe about 40 minutes south of San Francisco. But the
church?
One of the co-founders of the church, they were starting a San Francisco location for the church. And so I went to the San Francisco location and had the opportunity to meet him. And, this is in 2017, so like 5 years ago at this point. And he's a super cool dude. Yeah, his name's Vance. And so I also served at the church too. Like, I served on like the capture team. So I like took photos and stuff like that. And so I had the opportunity to work under his leadership. And so he and I stayed in touch. And when I was working on Shopper, he kind of had the idea for Overflow, which is what I'm working on right now. Okay. And, he and I stayed in touch, and he mentioned this founder fellowship program called On Deck. And what On Deck is basically a program where you bring a bunch of early stage founders together, and it's like it's like a community of startup founders at the earliest stages, and everyone can like learn from each other and all of that stuff. So he mentioned that he had done the previous cohort, and he referred me to do it for Shopper. And so while I was working on Shopper, I was on deck. And then, you know, after I left, I'm like, what do I do next? You know, he calls me one day and he says, hey, I'm interviewing for Y Combinator, which we had interviewed for Shopper. And he was like, I need some, can you give me some advice on, you know, the interview? So I shared with him some advice that we learned from based off of like our learnings from our interview. And so ultimately he comes back, he didn't get into YC. And a big reason is that YC looks for, they want you to have a technical founder, a technical co-founder, because they're like, you know, if you're going to be able to build something, you need someone in-house that can do that. And so he and I ended up joining forces, and I joined the founding team of Overflow. And so we've been working on, and what Overflow is, our mission is to inspire the world to give. And we make it super easy for people to donate stock to nonprofits. And so most people have most of their wealth in non-cash assets, right? They may have like a percentage of their wealth in cash to cover like, you know, day-to-day expenses, emergency funds, stuff like that. But otherwise it's in stock or like crypto. But most nonprofits are fundraising for cash, right? And so there's that misalignment. And with Vance being the CFO of the church, a lot of people that went to the church, they worked at tech companies like Google, you know, Apple. And so majority of their wealth was in stock. And they were like, how can we give stock? And it just wasn't an easy process. So that's how the idea came along. And then, you know, I've also, when I was working at Twilio, I wanted to give away, donate Twilio stock to the church. And, you know, there's just like a cumbersome process. So I knew the pain point that he was looking to solve. And so it was just kind of like a no-brainer to work there or work together. But a huge thing I would say in my journey is just like that stepping out on faith, right? Where I left Twilio and I had nothing, you know, I'm like, all right, I'm starting this from nothing, you know. I had given myself a year and, you know, Shopper didn't work out and I'm like, what's next? But I eventually figured things out and I landed on my feet, which was, you know, a blessing in itself. And just, you know, to get to the Forbes 30 under 30, it's just like a culmination of hard work. You know, like I always say, like I'm happy that I got that Forbes recognition. And I always say like a list doesn't define me, but it feels good to be recognized, right? Yes. And so like just seeing people, you know, just working hard, building relationships with people. People have noticed like, you know, the work I put in. Like I've tried starting businesses in the past, and I've done it all. And so it's just, this isn't. I think people are just now starting to notice me, but I've been doing the work, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, you bring up a lot of good points. I'm glad you shared that story. So just to touch on it, I'll kind of go from where we just left off. You said people are just starting to notice you. You know, seeds are planted in the ground, but they have to become radical. The radical has to go down, then the plumule has to come up, and it has to shoot up to form the shoot, and then the radical goes down to form the root. So that's an analogy based on germination. We tend to not notice things until they have been developing or have developed to a very obvious level. So that's that. Also, you mentioned how the utility of the ideas came about through the needs in the environment. So the value proposition came about through the needs in the environment. That's good. And then, you know, a number of things. You said stepping out in faith. We could have a whole discussion on that right there. But that'll be another episode later on. Sweat equity in terms of your work experience. So it took time. In essence, it took time for you to achieve what you achieved and to develop the skills and acumen, the maturity, if I may say so, to really walk in the fulfillment of the ideas and promises and whatever the case may be. So that's good. That's really good. So how do you maintain a view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general? Do you have a faith perspective? What's the foundation on which you see your life, or the lens in which you see obstacles in your career and in your personal day-to-day living?
Yeah, no, faith is it plays a huge role, you know, especially when it comes to startups. Startups, they're, you know, very fast paced. There's a lot of uncertainty or uncertainty. Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
I was like, what's the
Make your own words. You've earned it.
Yeah.
Make your own words.
A lot of uncertainty, right, in startups. And, is you're literally moving by faith, right? And you're like, this is our hypothesis. This is the world we see, right? We see a more generous world in the future, and it's like, how do we make that vision come to pass? And like in the day when you're in the day to day in the minutia, it's hard to like see the bigger picture. And there's even times where I'll beat myself up and I'm like, dang, we haven't achieved as much as we want to achieve, and there's so much more work ahead. But even when I just sit back and look back where we were a year ago in the business and to where we are now, it's like, I'm like, damn, we've actually done a lot. So it's very useful, every once in a while to always like take that, to zoom out and just look at the bigger picture as opposed to, getting stuck in the day to day. So that's often a tool that I do use whenever, things get frustrating. It's like, take a pen out and then just, trusting God personally, as like being a man of faith, like knowing that things are going to work out the way they need to. And, just seeing how my path, from college to getting out here is just one of those things where it's like, even if there are some missteps, I'll ultimately be redirected along the way, just kind of like a GPS, right? You're being rerouted.
So again, this is a really good conversation. I feel I'm gonna have to listen to this episode again because this is inspiring. So for example, you said redirection. I think it's all a part of the plan, and when you have a faith perspective, it allows you to account for the difficulties, account for the uncertainties. And how I like to say it is, in my personal life, because I'm a person of faith as well, I think my faith allows me to parameterize or break down the uncertainty into parameters in which I look at every element and I'm able to reinforce my ideas, reinforce what I believe in the situation. So that's that. And then also, you bring up the issue of when you face frustrations, your faith comes into play. So that's really good, really commendable. So how have you been adaptive and creative in the field of computer science? Where have you added your flair? Where do you see your spin on things? What ideas that you thought of or implemented? How have they been developed?
So a few years ago, I kind of adopted this tagline that I'm building dope technology for the culture. Okay. And so, being a software engineer and then being like a Black software engineer at that, is very rare. There's a lot of Black software engineers out there, but in the grand scheme, if you look at the entire pool of software engineers, we're a minority, right?
That's fair.
So one thing that I've always wanted to do is build dope technology for the culture. And so when it comes to work, I try to apply that different spin and kind of swagger, so to speak,
find the right environments for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually?
I think community is huge for me, and I think especially for everything I do, I always try to find people that are 1 to 2 steps ahead of me, that's able to kind of just help guide me. I'm able to learn from their experiences, their mistakes that they've made, and also their successes. And so that's huge for me. And then also just friends, so my best friends, they also went to Georgia Tech, and they're also out here, and they're also in tech. And so, they're working at startups, at, tech companies. And so just being able to learn from their experiences, and then just being part of various communities. So the On Deck, that community has been huge in terms of just learning and growing, as well as this organization called Dev Color that I'm in, which is essentially a peer-based network for Black software engineers.
One more time, can you repeat it?
It's a peer-based network.
Oh, peer.
Peer, PER, Okay. So peer-based. And so it's everyone's everyone's equal. And the cool thing about Dev Color is that, the idea is they have this thing where they say, you don't give advice, you share experiences. And so all of that stuff has been super helpful with me adapting to this industry.
Good. And that's kind of the same approach that I've taken in the formation of the chemist company when it comes to peer advisors. It's not really advice, but sharing experiences, ideas. It's almost as if information synthesis is occurring. and that's it. So information synthesis, and then refining and distilling that so you produce a really good seminal product that's based off of scientific insight, business ideas, and hopefully some good reasoning. So that's good. Kyle, I would ask you this. Do you have any advice to those wanting to pursue the field you're currently working in? What's your advice to someone who sees what you're doing and probably won't be able to interact with you in person, but they hear this episode and they're like, I really would appreciate, or I really could use some advice from a person of color who's achieved recognition on the Forbes list, who also went to Georgia Tech and has been proficient as a computer scientist. So you can speak in a lot of spaces, but for that particular person, what would your advice be?
Yeah, so disclaimer, no person's, everyone's path is going to be different, right?
Exactly.
And so for me, if I were to extract like the basic principles from my experience, the first thing is like, what's your vision, right? So starting there, understanding, what you want to do, what you want to be, right? And then from there, creating that plan. And so for me, I always knew I wanted to do technology. And so that was, kind of what led me to Georgia Tech. But say, for example, people are even, going on non-traditional career routes, right? Say you're already in the workforce, but you want to navigate to software engineering, or even like building your own company. I think being in those non-traditional routes is totally fine, but I would encourage, that person to reach out to those people that are doing the things that they want to do, just to gain some perspective and know if it's something you really want to do, and as well as knowing what all it takes to do it. And then I think once you do that and you're solidified on your vision, I think it's just one of those, this is where you execute, right? And I feel like the execution, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of it's unseen. And I love when you use the seed analogy, right? We can learn a lot from nature.
Oh yes, creation speaks.
Yeah, exactly. And so
there's no language.
Once you have that vision, just executing and just having faith that that things will work out, and if they're meant to be, and then you'll be rerouted otherwise. So that's essentially has been my playbook from start with that vision, find people that are doing it, execute, right? And so that's my playbook.
A lot of execution. So yeah, that's good. So what you bring up, I'm a person of faith, so there's a quote in the scripture that says, Habakkuk 2:4, write the vision, make it plain. So that's good. That's very good. And also, I believe, or I've come to understand that many times as we walk through life, though we encounter obstacles, if we have a vision in mind, it helps us to stay motivated, even when we encounter challenges. Because we know this is where I'm looking. I can think out, this is how I see it. I can think out of my circumstance, or think beyond the challenge, or look beyond it, because I see in the distance, I see the horizon, I see the sun coming up over the horizon, and I can press on towards that. So that's good. What's been some of the most beneficial advice you have received?
I would say the most beneficial advice that I've received has been, I think, is not being afraid to fail. I would say
fail forward.
Exactly. And I know like Mark Zuckerberg, when he was first starting Facebook, they had this slogan like move fast and break things. And I think it's natural to have like a fear of, failure.
Yeah, we're human.
Yeah, it's human. But I think the quicker you get to failure is the quicker you get to success. And pretty much success is just an accumulation of failures. And so, the biggest advice I've kind of had is that, be okay with like failing, because it's an opportunity to learn.
Exactly.
And so I think that's like the biggest thing that we can take away from failing is just that learning. And then the next thing is that, like, I guess a piece of advice is just that no one knows what they're doing. I feel like, we're all kind of like learning, even like some of the biggest companies you can think of, sometimes they're put together by duct tape, like their processes. And you would think that like, these really big companies are polished, but like no one, knows what they're doing. Well, I don't want to say no one knows what they're doing, but we're all learning.
Yeah, we're all learning.
We're all learning, and
nothing is perfect.
Exactly. And we're all like, adapting to pretty much based on the information that we have at that current moment.
Yeah, so I agree with what you're saying. We're constantly iterating and improving what we're doing, our practice, our mode of action, our thinking, our mental models, all those things. There's a lot of iteration that's going on because the world changes. Nothing
Exactly.
stays the same. We live in a dynamic world. And for you to stay the same all the time, I don't think it complements to you progressing and advancing in this world. So
Exactly.
that's that. And then also you mentioned the thing about failure. I think evaluated experiences, even when you fail in those experiences, and non-repeating failures complement a lot to success.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, you could fail, but if you repeat, that presents a challenge. But if you fail, you address it, you learn from it, and you start to work around or above or beyond it, I think you start to progress even more towards your vision. But thank you so much, Kyle, for joining me today. It was so good to have you on. Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is The New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guests and I. Thank you, Social, for joining me today. It's good to have you here. So,
happy to be here, man. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, what have been your long-standing interests in the field of science?
So I'm gonna say two different things. When I first decided to go into engineering, it was, I guess, the biggest thing on my mind at that time was, the issue of like renewable energy, climate change was a big topic throughout my high school years, and I was good at math, I was good at science. I didn't particularly enjoy English, but I did like history, so I was in this point of making a decision whether to go through the humanities or go into the sciences. Being young, I didn't really know what I wanted, but I thought, hey, renewable energy is what I'm interested in. I'm also interested in improving places like Africa, so I decided to go into the sciences. But my first day at Georgia Tech, I met a guy who was in aerospace, and I asked him, so what's aerospace engineering? And he looked at me like, I don't know. And he asked me, what's chemical engineering? And I was like, I don't know. So it's like, I feel like a lot of people go into the sciences of just being good at math and science, which is okay.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, man. So I understand that, because many times when you are someone who's good or gifted in math and sciences, people almost direct you in that direction or point you in that direction in terms of engineering or medicine or something of those lines.
Exactly.
Yeah, or grad school. So, given that you studied chemical engineering, why did you choose chemical engineering as a field to major in?
So again, this is 17-year-old, 16-year-old me making decisions, right? And there was two things. Firstly, my sister studied chemical engineering, and there was a lot of high praise for the topic in my family, even though I didn't really know what it was. I asked my sister what chemical engineering was, and she said process engineering, which was even more meaningless to me. But then she said organic chemistry. And my first day doing organic chemistry in high school, the professor said, hey guys, we're going to start organic chemistry. This is where the money is in science. And again, 16-year-old me, I was 15-year-old me. I don't know how old I was that class. I just paid attention. I just paid a lot of attention. And I got really good at organic chemistry because I was just paying a lot of attention during Ogo class.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, so then when it came time to pick, I picked engineering because, there was a lot of praise for engineering in my family. And then I picked chemical engineering because of a mix of my sister and of my my love for organic chemistry at the time. So that's kind of what led me to pick chemical engineering.
So basically, passion and family influences led you to choose chemical engineering as a discipline.
Yeah, I also thought chemical engineering would play into, you know, solar panels and things like that, which tied into renewable energy and sustainability. But that would be an aspect, that would be an interest of mine that will actually grow later on, more so than when I first decided to go into engineering.
Okay, yeah, dude, that's definitely a good point. So I saw that you went to University of Cambridge. Congrats. That's very good. Yeah, you went to University of Cambridge. So why did you choose engineering for sustainable development as a field to do your graduate studies in?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I finished undergrad in chemical engineering. I didn't particularly like chemical engineering when I was studying it, to be honest. Okay. I really enjoyed just the university experience, just getting to take random classes and other topics. I took classes in international relations, women's literature, Cuban history, African American history, post-colonialism. And then the chemistry classes and biochem classes I really liked. But the physics and engineering classes specifically, I was good at them. I did well. But I wouldn't say it was something that I was so excited to show up to class to. Like I was excited to go to biochem, but I wasn't that excited to go to transport or kinetics. But when I started working, I was working in the plastic industry in the US. And man, I was in lab with podcasts in my ear talking about, you know, politics, current affairs. And it just hit me that I was just not in the right space. I mean, I was working in the plastic industry, which is very related to organic chemistry, if not the extension of organic chemistry. But I just didn't feel like, what I was working on in front of me in the lab was not the most important thing for me. I was listening to other things, like podcasts in my ears. And so I started looking at master's programs, and I was looking at manufacturing engineering, engineering management, because I was thinking, look, let me go find a way to make engineering tie into my passion. So using engineering for industrializing developing countries. Then I came across this program at Cambridge. I actually wasn't thinking of leaving the US, but when I read the program, like the course curriculum, that was it, man. I mean, it was like sustainable urban development, energy for rural development, how do I say it? Like sustainable architecture and urban design. I was like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm looking for, you know?
Okay.
And it was just straight. It was like engineering. It was a program for engineers. I mean, maybe you ask me some questions on this later on, but I'll say it was the best year of my life, man. And,
wow, that's good.
Wake up. I say this to everybody. I wake up on a Tuesday. It doesn't matter if it's a Tuesday or Saturday. Every day was just. I would forget what day it was. I'll forget if it's Wednesday or Friday. Like, you know, I never lived life like that before. Most of the time, you look forward to the weekend and you dread the week. This was nothing like that, because I was just engaged, and I was just happy to be working on what I was working on. Yeah.
So why would you say that's an interesting statement? You know, why would you say it was the best year of your life? What made it that way? Was it the program? Was it the people you're interacting with? Was it the whole? Was it the landscape, the environment, the country? What complemented that being the best year of your life?
I would say two things. I mean, the country was nice. Cambridge was nice. It's a nice little town. British people were nice, but I think for me, it was a combination of the program and the people in the program. The people leading the program were very open in terms of like how it would be led. They encouraged us to ask them difficult questions. They encouraged us to ask each other difficult questions. So it was maybe the most intellectually engaged I'd ever been. People asking very hard questions and challenging each other, but not in a egoistic manner, you know. Yeah. It was more, what is the best solution, including social aspects, talking about gender aspects, talking about environmental aspects, talking about economic aspects of technology, all these things. And the program was great in itself and what I learned. But then the people, just being around very impassioned people of similar values to you, also having these almost idealistic goals.
Yeah.
was nice, you know, and it was an environment where I was allowed to just be me, just ask hard questions, just express myself. And it's difficult to find those kind of environments. I was lucky to stumble on something like that. Yeah.
I agree. It is difficult to find those types of environments, especially environments where you can thrive and be your authentic self.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's not trying to mask your aspirations.
Yeah.
Because you know, a lot of people have these lofty aspirations, so because of the environment that they're surrounded by, they kind of mask or just muffle their aspirations in a way. To kind of fit in.
To fit in, you know, and I mean, again, like this was not something I was expecting. You know, I went there thinking the course program. I'm here for the course program, and the course program was good. Don't get me wrong, but what I did not expect was the people out that were going to be also attracted to this program, and just all these people, rather idealistic, coming to this one space. And it was like a match. I was just really good.
Yeah, it sounds like you found your niche. As well.
It's over now, though.
Pardon me?
I said the program's over now, though. So
yeah, man. So how have you maintained vision and teamwork in your environment? Given that all the things you do, you work in a division of the World Bank Group. So how are you maintaining vision and teamwork in your environment?
Vision and teamwork.
Yes.
Okay. You know, so I think I'll talk about those two, split the question in two. So vision for me, my vision, my goals is to contribute to this world in some kind of positive manner. While at the same time feed myself, but
that's true. Very important.
But to, you know, to come here, I mean, I didn't ask to be born, but to try and achieve something positive with my life, and to treat people around me well. And I mean, holding on to that vision, because being in the World Bank Group, this is no longer academia surrounded by other young students where we can talk about big lofty ideas, and try and think about the ideal. Here you're dealing with other people who don't necessarily see the world the way you do. You're dealing with an organization that's very old and has had its impact on the world, both negative and positive. And you have people who, I mean, the International Finance Corporation, right? So a lot of people here are involved in finance, not necessarily in engineering. And the conversations you get kind of like when you join any organization, you can start trying to fit in, trying to please others. And it's important, that's not necessarily wrong, but it's important to also keep your vision, your goals, and your ideals at the forefront. Like, you must have a guiding philosophy for how you work and what you want to do with your career. So I try to do that. I try to reach out to people in the office that are not in my team, that I think might have similar values to me. And I say, hey, let's have a conversation. I saw you at this WebEx call. Everything's virtual now, right? So I saw you on this WebEx call, and you were saying certain things that I found interesting. Could we talk some more? And try and keep developing my own personal vision, my own personal philosophy, my own personal ideas while still doing my work. Teamwork, I think I kind of touched on that in a way, but including others in what you do. I think a lot of people are very protective of their work. They think, this person's going to take my idea and run with it and become a millionaire off me. But most of the time, no. Most of the time when you expose your idea to critique, maybe not a baby, like very just budding idea, but you have a little bit of an idea and you expose it to critique, you find that the people who want to talk about it are people who have similar interests to you, similar values to you. People who are not interested don't want to talk about that idea. And not just that, but then people will also add their critiques and they will help you develop your ideas. So teamwork, people should never see themselves as, I'm going to save the world, I'm going to be the one to make the company $1 million. It's not likely. And the best way that you will save the world / make the company $1 million is to work with other people and be open and be vulnerable and
I completely agree. Synergy is very important. You know, like many people say some of these statements are quite common. You know, they have a dream, but you can only go as far as your team.
Yeah.
You know? And many times, you know, one is good, but more than one many times is better when it comes to working on an idea or goal. I mean,
I was gonna say, like, you being in academia and a PhD, you're gonna be presenting your work to different places, and people are gonna be asking you questions, critiquing, and it's a positive thing, right? That helps you. Oh, I never thought about that. Let me add that in.
Yeah, that's a part of the learning process, you know. Like sometimes, you know, and this is an analogy, you know, when a potter is making a piece of a vase or some type of ceramic, you know, many times the potter has to shape, mold, take away, heat up, put some coats on it. It's a process. And all of those things are part of the process of learning and growing and developing into your full self and actualizing as a person.
100%.
Yeah. So I think what you were saying, especially in terms of, you know, making sure that you maintain your personal philosophy as you work in an environment, and as you seek to fulfill the missions and goals of the environment that you're working in, maintaining your personal philosophy. The thing that actually crossed my mind was, you know, if in another analogy, you know, in chemistry, and this is an analogy from chemistry. Every element has a characteristic transition in terms of from the homo to the lomo, and when it relaxes, it releases a specific frequency of light. That light is characteristic of. So each one of us has something characteristic about our lives. And you know, the thing that's so beautiful in chemistry is when you see multiple lights together. So multiple characteristic transitions or multiple frequencies of light together, and you get this beautiful spectrum. This beautiful spectrum, exactly. So I think it just makes it worthwhile when you work together with people. So along those same lines, you know, you've been to Cambridge. And that's not an average school, I think, by any standard. So I would say in some ways you have been successful as a student. So how have you been successful? How would you say you've been successful?
You know,
if you and one more question to add on to that. How have you been successful? And if someone listening to this podcast was saying, I want to go to Cambridge as well, what would be advice to that person who wants to go to Cambridge?
Okay, so I'll go on this. I'll be on the second question: how to go to Cambridge. I think that firstly, I think someone should ask the question: why do you want to go to Cambridge? I mean,
yes, that's important.
I think that's important.
That's important.
I think Cambridge is a place, and they keep certain things there, and they do research on certain things there. But it might be that what you want to research, what you want to be, doesn't align with what's going on in Cambridge. So one person's going to Cambridge and is success and it's in line with what they want to do, that's great. Somebody going to Cambridge and not in line with what they want to do, then you're just trying to get a title or you're trying to get something for the CV. I mean, not necessarily a negative, but ask yourself, you have limited time on this planet. Do you want to spend it just getting a title?
That's true.
So how to go to Cambridge though? I think, I'll say how I got there. I took a risk. You know, I was on a work visa in the United States and going to Cambridge, and the masters in Cambridge are not called Masters of Arts, Masters of Science, they're called Masters of Philosophy. So I didn't know if this was, and I never heard of Masters of Philosophy before, so I didn't know I was going there to study a real degree. I was like, oh man, I don't know what this is.
Sounds like the hidden curriculum.
So I took a risk when I decided to leave my job, become a student, go back to school, go to Cambridge, leave the United States with no assurance that I was going to come back. And this is the biggest job market, so that's a big thing. And so I took a risk, and at the same time, I was very honest in my application. I said, this is what I see in your program. This is what I want to do. This is why I think I need to come to your program. And this is why I think you would like me in your program. That's all I said. Of course, there was stuff that I'd done before. I expressed what I did for fun. I talked about the fact that I danced salsa. I talked about all that in my essay. I talked about how I was volunteering and trying to help my community. Luckily, I had done a program in undergrad where I did well. Well, luckily, or thankfully, that's the word. And those two things come together: my personal aspirations and interests, and my past academic success, and they accepted me. So I don't think they'll turn you down if your grades were a little bit lower than me. And I don't think they'll necessarily accept you out of the blue if your grades were a bit higher. I think it's the combination of those two. This is who I am. This is what I've done. And would you let me in? And I think for undergrad, I didn't get into a lot of schools. I got into maybe 3 schools. But for master's program, I got into almost every school I applied to. And I think not necessarily because my grades were so good, but because I had a better idea of what I wanted to do. And what I was writing to them, what I was showing them about myself, I think they understood this is a guy who has a certain goal. And our program aligns with his goal, and he looks like he can succeed here. So let's let him in. And I think for any girl, guy, or any person who wants to apply to these kind of big schools, let's be sure it's what you want and not what you think other people want out of you.
Yeah.
And sorry, that was a lot about how to be successful. It's going to be a really easy one. Work with others, study groups, friends, access to past papers. That all comes from other people. So you gotta make friends.
I agree.
Georgia Tech, and you will not do well.
No man's an island.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Yeah, man. So given all your responsibilities and accomplishments, how do you maintain a balanced life? Or strive to maintain a balanced life?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. And I know, that's a tough one. I think sometimes it's easier. Like when I was in Cambridge, it's a bit easier because the people I was surrounded by were so similar to me in the sense in terms of values. So they also liked doing things after class. So they would invite me for things. I didn't always have to plan my week. Tuesday, someone would just say, "You want to go do this?" And it'll sound nice, so I'll go do it. But now in the working world, or when you're working, it's a bit more, especially during COVID times. You really gotta take care of yourself. I mean, look, you see me here. There's nobody here. There's nobody next to me, right? So I'm alone for hours of the day, and that's not good. Human beings, we're not individuals like that. We can be introverted, but you still need that social interaction. You need it to stay mentally healthy. So I'm every day, man, I would joke you not, I try to take a walk with someone. I hit up with my friends in the town and want to take a walk. If they're somebody who wants to wear their mask outside, fine, I'll wear my mask with you. I will walk, but I need social interaction, man. And
people need people.
Yeah, just simple, nice conversation that helps me stay balanced. It really, really does. Yeah. So I say people shouldn't feel lonely. And then there are others who have real commitments, like they have kids at home, things like that, and reach out for help as much as you can because,
we're all in this together.
Yeah,
many times we question whether we're alone, and some people may feel like they legitimately are alone, and that's understood, or at least people try to understand. But many times we think we're alone, but we're not.
We're not. Just don't be. People shouldn't be scared to reach out to other people, friends, family, just to talk. It helps. And share what you're going through. It really helps. So stay balanced, man. I try to just talk to friends.
That's your take on it. That's your take on it.
Good friend.
Along the same lines of community and not being alone. Personally, in my faith tradition, one of the things that's emphasized is that God is for you, or your faith plays a large role in you having perspective when it comes to you encountering challenging circumstances, so that you know that you're not alone in those circumstances. That's
even
just my faith.
I like that one. Even when you're alone, there's other people you can reach out to, which is just sit down and
there's a community of people.
Talk to your God. fact. Maybe not. Yeah, I find that inner peace.
Yeah, finding the peace. Yes, but anyway, what have been your most effective and impactful ideas to date?
My most effective and impactful ideas, man. I created this technology that solved climate change now. I think my dissertation I did for my master's program was one of the things I was really proud of. It was hard to come up with a topic, but essentially my master's program, my dissertation focused on plastic pollution in Lagos, and goes on around a lot of developing countries and developed countries. Everybody's dealing with this issue of plastic pollution. In Lagos, it's extremely bad. With a heavily populated city, with not very good infrastructure, not very good waste collection and waste management infrastructure. So a lot of the plastic goes mismanaged into the environment. And I went to Lagos, I went to different parts of the city, interviewed different individuals, government officials, NGO workers, businesses, trying to understand what was the issue, what are the barriers to solving the issue, and what are possible solutions. I'm wanting to publish my dissertation, but I am so slow. I am so slow at editing it down for a journal. But I'm really hoping to. If not, I'm just gonna put this thing on my LinkedIn page at least, just because it's just something to share. I would like to share. I can talk a little bit about the solutions that I'll talk about one thing about it. I know we're running low on time, so I'll wrap this quick. So there's a lot of waste picking that goes on in developing countries, and a lot of that waste picking is done by informal workers. A lot of those informal workers are children or struggling mothers, and it's not healthy work. It's not good public health work. It's not safe. And a lot of countries are not dealing with that informal labor that underlies their waste management infrastructure in a lot of countries. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed. So that's a social sustainability issue at Motion that coincides with an environmental issue. So none of these things stand alone. But yeah,
dude, I completely agree, because many times we look at these issues in isolation, but there are granularities associated with these issues, and the issues many times are connected in terms of social frameworks, environmental frameworks, personal, physical, mental, all those things play a large role. But when it comes to issues that pertain to people's lives. So, my last question for you: how do you maintain view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general, especially when you encounter challenging circumstances? You have some type of personal philosophy, some worldview. What is the guiding light? If I was to coin a phrase, use a phrase that's coined. What is the basis on which you stay optimistic?
I think having a lot of people know what they don't like in society.
Okay.
But if you ask them, what is the society you would like to live in? A lot of people find it very hard to describe that society. So, I mean, that extends to a lot of things, like politics, a lot of things. People don't know, they know what they don't like, but they don't really know what they want.
Wow.
And so that's an interesting question, because do I know what I'm walking towards, what I would like to achieve in the future? When I know I don't like this, I know I don't like working here, I know I like this a little bit. I think something I said in the beginning, if I could with my life, with my career, improve the quality of life for people in a sustainable manner, socially sustainable, economically sustainable, environmentally sustainable manner, I feel like I would have done enough. I don't, and again, this doesn't mean, I alone fix climate change, but if I can make my contribution to the world in a better way, treat people around me well, as well as I would like to be treated, if not better, and I think I've done it. I think I've done enough. And people need to recognize when they've done enough, because a lot of people hold themselves to such high standards, so unrealistically high standards, and that can hurt you. Even when you're succeeding, you think you're failing.
Wow.
But it's just being humble enough to say, I've done enough. I've tried my hardest. That's it. And be satisfied with that. So that's it for me. If I know I'm trying my hardest, or I tried my hardest, then I've done enough. Then I can rest easy. If I know I haven't tried my best for people, then I know. Then it's on. Then I gotta address that. But yeah. So that's guiding philosophy. The thing that I just try to try my best at everything, personal interactions and work interactions. Try my best.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there are many things I could say on that. You know, one of the things me and my siblings, we say to each other sometimes is, you know, do the best you can wherever you can at all times you can. You know,
there you go.
Make sure that your best is not something that you do sometimes, but it's something that you work towards and you improve, and you are always striving to be your best. And you know, along those same lines, I completely agree. It's not just about achieving things, but you know, you have to recognize when you have achieved something substantial and be satisfied with that.
Yeah.
I always feel like you're constantly having to prove.
Yeah.
Or constantly having to, I think we all have to work on this.
Everybody. You see the most success people, you look at them and you're like, you're so successful, and they'll look at you like, I feel like a failure. It's because they're not seeing it through a bigger perspective. That's not this, I want it to be this and I'm not this. It's you got what you've done so far. That's great. So
reflecting is good. But anyway, so it's good to have you on. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for the invite.
Purpose of these episodes not at all for advice or medical suggestions. These are aimed to provide support to peer pharmacists in training in educational and intellectually stimulating ways. Again, these are not at all for medical advice or medical suggestions. Please see your local board and state-certified health professional. The views of this podcast represent those of my guests and I.
Thanks for listening to the podcast series The New Student Pharmacist, where we discuss chemistry and pharmacy, as well as leaders in pharmacy careers, community, and chemistry and pharmacy research. We encourage you to support the work we are doing and follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts by subscribing for free. We are so glad that you were able to tune in today. Note: The views on the podcast represent those of my guest, and I take care and all the best.